Oh, okay. So we are theoretically live. Trying to see if it's actually popping up for the viewers. Don't know if anybody's here with us live yet.
That's fine. So, I mean, I've done a couple podcasts that really didn't turn into anything at all. And I realize this one has like very few viewers, but it's still pretty fun. And
Few-ish.
yeah, I went through. I mean, there's a community there, so it was exciting to be part of it.
Yep. All right. So we have audio and all that stuff. And I don't know if anybody is here live with us, but if you are and you want to throw a question in, that'd be great. We like interacting with people live. So this is my friend Luke. Can I use your last name?
Yeah.
Okay, Luke Dupin. Yes.
It's good.
And I know you're like a crypto geek and a software engineer. Is that what you do? Or
yeah. So formal training is software engineering, mathematician for a short period of time.
What was your specific field?
Yeah, computer science and math.
Well, but I mean, college. In math, you could be like, I don't know, a vector calculus guy.
Yeah, that's why it was a short time. I got into game physics and a game engine design for a short while and realized I didn't like that industry as much. So.
Oh, yeah. So we probably have interesting conversations about collision detection and
it's tricky
optimizing matrices and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's tough when you're dealing with like variable frame rates in physics engines. It's really easy for stuff to shoot to the moon.
Yes, or items to pass through other items. Or I ended up experimenting with like working in a 6-dimensional matrix that would take like a moving triangle and view it as this weird shape where like it's a triangle, but then it's a triangle over here because it moves. And you have a bounding box around that, and you detect the movement of particles that are colliding with that. And you do like a bounding box around the movement of a point and a bounding box around the movement of the triangle. And then you detect when things are in the bounding boxes, then you go to more specific things where you're doing like a raycast between all of the different parts of this 4-dimensional shape. And I actually have it working pretty well in my cloth engines, such that in a single frame, if an object moves like from here to way up here and there's a point in between, it will detect the collision and it will pick up its velocity. And so there are ways to solve those problems.
Oh yeah. It's the difficulty is to have it not balloon, the calculations to not balloon, so to know which ones you need to check.
Yeah, when you get into multiple layers of things colliding simultaneously in the same space, then how do you respond to that? You've got 6 different things saying it should move in 6 different directions. Yep. It's like, I don't know how God solved these problems when he was designing the physical universe.
Yeah, well, it's it doesn't. The universe doesn't work based on snapshots. I think that's the key.
Or if it does, maybe it's like every whatever the smallest fundamental particle is, maybe each one of those just does sphere collisions with neighbors. And so it's like he's just cheating by using the same algorithm for everything.
Yeah.
And maybe it is happening in steps. And but just, the path of a finite object with a radius to do collisions on that is pretty simple. So, but who knows? It could be that, like in video games, you don't really care what's happening outside the camera frustum for the sake of drawing and things like that. If there's physical things happening that need to update, you have to have some at least simplified way of keeping track of where things are. But you only do the really minute details for stuff that's inside what the camera sees. And so it could be God is cheating and just doing something like that, where everybody has their own local access to the universe or something. And
it's like the double slit experiment theory.
Yeah.
The act of being an observer changes whether it's a specific action or a range of possible actions that happen.
I find in some cases when people geek out about things like the double slit experiment, sometimes they're looking at the data in like completely the wrong way. What? Food? Oh, the wife is here with food. Appreciate it.
Delivery.
I might eat when he starts going into his rants.
Uh,
The door shut by itself.
Man, that's magic there.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, this actually leads right into one of the more interesting topics I talk to my friends about. So, do you think that we live in a mutable? Well, first of all, do you think that time is an actual dimension, or do you think it's a construct?
You know, in math, you start to think about time because I work in like 4D simulations was one of the first things I did when I started to get into this. And a 4D simulation is essentially like a project lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So you model, like you create a model of a bridge. I had like this 500-page blueprint of the St. Croix River crossing. And I was creating a 4D simulation of it. And it's actually built. You can look up the St. Croix River crossing and it pulls up all these 3D models and renderings and stuff that probably I did. They're online. And it's not, you don't think of it as like super geeky or scientific or anything. It's just, here's the bridge is going to look like when it's just the pylons that have been driven into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what the bridge is going to look like once they've set up some of the piers. And here's what it's going to look like as they're expanding the sections of the bridge outwards to meet each other. And so you step through time and you model all of the stages of the project.
Right.
And it's essentially just objects that are changing states.
Well, let me ask you in this way then. So, as you and I sit here in this room, I'm certain that we would both agree that all the other physical spaces of the universe are existing as well.
Existing. Yeah. What do you mean by existing?
Well,
Define existing.
That like I-90 exists out there right now, and there's cars on it. And
so it's the question if a tree falls in the woods.
Well, no. Just talking physical space. So it's like being an observer of one section of physical space. I'm certain that we agree that all the other sections of physical space are also like that. There's observers there, and that's happening. That all that exists.
I don't buy like a solipsistic, like I'm the only being in the universe and my consciousness is all that exists. That seems to be an alternative.
A little self-centered.
Yeah, well, if you listen to like Stephen Furtick or Joel Osteen, then that would make sense. Kind of a narcissistic approach to reality.
Yeah, I mean, if you think everyone else is an NPC, I guess so. But
I think a lot of people are.
So basically everyone agrees on that. But the next question is that okay, so if we are sitting at one point in time, do all the other points in time exist right now?
The way that I think about it, because I'm so used to scrolling back and forth on the timeline when I'm doing stuff in 3D, or you just put time as another dimension in your matrix. So you have, instead of a 3D matrix, you have a 4D matrix, and you can actually do computations to see like if things are changing orthogonally on the time axis. And, so
yep.
I probably have an unusual way of thinking about time.
I don't think so.
But
that's the immutable universe theory.
Okay. So like this coffee cup, like it's right here, and now it's right here, and now it's right here again. The previous moment when it was right here, that would be, it existed exactly in one location in 4 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I moved it back, it came back to that place. So it's like, it's moving in time over to here. It's moving back in time. So this, this object has essentially traveled back in time when it's moved back to its original location.
Right. Yeah. So the only way that we would define how we perceive time is like the arrangement of all the particles in the universe.
The relative position of things. Like we measure where we're at in time relative to where the Earth is in its rotation around the sun. But if for some reason the Earth moved back, then the Earth would basically be moving back in time because it's moving back to its relative position to the sun or whatever.
Well, and I think what you're hitting on right there is exactly the reason why basically everyone does think there is time. I personally don't. I don't think that time is an actual thing. I think that time is required for our models to work. But like Sun Tzu said, the map isn't the terrain.
Yeah.
The models are not the actual existence of the universe, and so I don't think it exists. But I think that the natural reason why we all do is that we grow up with this celestial dance of Earth moving around the sun in a very set way. And, we're used to a progression of events, and then we have a memory of those other events, so we can imagine what it used to be like at another point in time. But I don't think it actually does exist.
Yeah. Some of the
Um,
things that, people claim give time a direction would be like entropy would be a direction for time. So my dad always used to say you can't run a sausage grinder backwards to create hogs. And in math, there are certain algorithms that you can run in both directions and certain others that you can't. So,
Yeah.
for example, if you had an array of values and you sum those arrays, then you have a number. Well, there's no way to do an operation on that number that would restore that array of vectors. Whereas if you multiply by a number, you can divide by that number and get back. So
yeah.
so
And
when
if they're all primes, you can always get the exact same vectors back every time
if they're all primes in an array that you sum,
that you multiply. If they're not primes, then you theoretically can't get them back the exact same way unless you have other
factorials.
There's
or
combinations.
What do you call it?
Yeah, the factors. Yep,
Yeah, factors.
that's right.
Yeah, so certain operations in math can go one direction but not the other. Certain operations in the physical universe can go one direction in time but not the other.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could move the coffee cup over here and then back here. The Earth could theoretically, there's nothing in the laws of physics that prohibit the Earth from like spinning back to exactly the same place it was a day ago. It could theoretically happen, and so you could reverse time for the Earth's position relative to the sun. But it seems like time is just the relative position of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's changed, stuff is always moving, and we pick like the largest thing that we can think of as a common point of reference, so we can measure all of our relative time by something that we all have in common. But like, what is time? Is there another way of thinking about time that maybe people have in their gut intuitively?
I don't know. I mean, it's so one exercise that's fun to do. Basically speaking, atomic clocks are made by counting cycles of cesium, the element cesium, and so it's roughly, was it 9.19 billion cycles is defined as a second. That's a rounding error, but that's roughly what the number is. And so if you change what you say time is from being something fundamental to cycles of cesium elements, and then you just do the counting operation and you replace that for the value of t of all the Newtonian equations, everything works perfectly well. And I think that the picture it gets painted is actually more complete if you stop thinking about time as actually existing and just start saying that it's an artifact of the way that we measure things with these measuring sticks that we call clocks.
Yeah.
And so like relativity, it actually works better with time not existing. So if you have, the classic thing with the inertial reference frames, where you have like one that's going faster than the other and they count differently. If you have two atomic clocks and you're just looking at counts of cesium in them, that as you move in one direction, your total amount of distance travel, the time it takes to count for the distance travel decreases because you're always going at the speed of light. So if you take up like 20% of your speed of light budget, then your clock is going to run at 80% of the speed from an observer that's outside of that. But to you, you're just counting until it reaches 9.19 billion, no matter what's going on.
So we know that if you have two atomic clocks and you are closer to like the center of the Earth's mass, then the tick rate is slower than if you're out in space, right? And there's something, it's affected by velocity somehow. I don't know how exactly. And so it kind of doesn't matter what you're using as your measuring stick to measure time. It can be out of sync with other measuring sticks because apparently it's relative. But when you say time doesn't exist.
Mhm.
Well, we're talking about a way of viewing time that we agree on that's fairly obvious, that it would be hard to say doesn't exist. You're saying that some other way of viewing time doesn't exist. What is that other way of viewing time where you can say that time doesn't exist?
Yeah, so it really comes down to, and I'm not gonna like die on this hill. I'm certain that I'm correct, but there's three basic ways to look at the universe. One is that we live in an immutable universe, and that the flow of time is what, like a movie over still frames, is what causes it to feel like it's mutating, like matter is changing state. But that's not what's actually happening. That all of the states of the universe are effectively established already, and we are like an index flowing through that. That's one way to look at it. That's the view that time does exist. The mutable universe view, where time doesn't have to exist, is that matter represents a bit of information, spin, velocity, mass, all this types of stuff, and that it changes as it is affected by other mass or affected by itself.
So it's kind of
So,
like
or
story
three,
of-
some other thing that I've never heard of.
there's another version of this that
I don't know. There's always an option for something else, but roughly speaking, it's mutable or immutable. And I just think it's much more simpler if it's mutable, and that's also the way that we experience it is that it's mutable, that it's changing.
Mhm.
And so I just, it could be something entirely different, but I think you have to enact so many other assumptions in order to make time be there. It's a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And still works.
Okay, so you're going with mutable, and immutable is sort of a classic way that people have viewed it. So
it's a mathematical way to look at it,
okay,
because our functions are immutable, right?
If you let me bring this into a context that makes sense to me. When I create an animated sequence for whatever, and I have a timeline that I control, I can move back and forth. We can reset everything to the way that it was, or I can move it forward. And if I hit go, then it plays it out in front of me. But what exists there is a set of events that are changing, and it's basically, it is immutable. It's, unless I go in and change it or something like that. But once it's set up, it's like a cup on a table. It's just a thing, and I can see what it is at different points in time as it's changing. But it's all completely deterministic. Nothing within that system is going to happen that's going to change it from being anything other than what it is. So you could say like an Augustinian, Neoplatonist, static omniscience. There's
That sounds
there's a
good.
whole-
Yeah, keep throwing those out.
there's this whole philosophy that goes with a deterministic theology or philosophy, or
Deterministic
it's kind of
world.
Platonic idea. And then it would be something like, if I had an audience to watch this animation sequence that I've created, the audience can observe it, but that's all that they can do. And so from that point of view, it's like you're sentient. You have the ability to perceive things that are going on, but you're sort of like the passenger in a roller coaster as you go through time.
Right.
And the Augustine, at least, created this view, or I don't know, Augustine popularized this view in Christianity. So to some extent, people don't realize it, but they have some level of determinism floating around in their minds. And it's interesting how he arrived at those conclusions. Augustine had a problem with the ladies. He was a bit of a lusty fellow.
Okay.
And
I was going to say problem in the sense that they really liked him, or
a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But he also had spiritual convictions, and he was struggling with that. So he lacked self-control, essentially. And one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. Well, if you have no self-control in a particular area, maybe you're addicted to heroin or something and you just can't stop. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't get self-control. So here's Augustine, who lacks self-control in regard to lust. And from there, he reasons that since he can't stop, he has no free will. He must have been preset on this deterministic path by God. And then he reasoned that must be the way it is for everybody else too. So it's it's kind of weird, but all of modern Christianity that's been influenced by Augustine, which is all of it, it's sort of like an Augustinian sex cult. I mean,
In the sense that we do have free will, or that we don't, and we're along for the ride.
in the doctrines that emerged from the way that he viewed these issues.
Mm-hmm.
So he believed that we have no capacity to do anything but sin, because when it came to the area of lust, he had no capacity to do anything but sin. He tried to conquer it, but he couldn't.
Yeah.
He was overpowered by this thing, and he couldn't find a way out of it. And then he projected that onto all of theology and his view of God. And then, so from there comes the doctrine of predestination. From there comes the doctrine of original sin. From there comes the doctrine of the sin nature. From there comes the doctrine of total depravity. And, Luther, Augustinian monk, read Augustine, devoted his life to the theology of Augustine. Calvin, I think Calvin said, was something like, Augustine is in me inasmuch as scripture is in me. He actually quoted Augustine more than the Bible in the Institutes. And so you just about can't go to a church without hearing something about like how we're born sinners.
Sure.
Or we have a sin
Very
nature.
Catholic. That's how I was raised. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the idea of the baptism and all this stuff to get away from your original sin that's passed down. And
yeah, but if you look at like Winky Pratney, it's a weird name, but like Winky Pratney, and look at his teachings on Augustine, or a more modern guy, Jesse Morrell, has some good documentaries. It's shocking that like there's literally 2 verses in the Bible that suggest we're born with sin.
Well, so talking about the self-control part of it, so there's 3 basic parts of the human brain when it comes to making decisions. There's your cerebellum, there's the limbic, and there's the neocortex. Mm-hmm. And so within that, this is the whole conversation that springs out of AI and will it ever be conscious and all that. And we can get into it, but basically speaking, that you as a conscious writer have the ability to go into a training mode effectively when you're learning something. Mm-hmm. And so, like, let's say you're learning to ski. Everything feels extremely awkward. Like you're using conscious thought to drive every muscle as it moves, all these types of things. And it's very difficult, but what you're doing is that you're training your passive actors. So there's parts of your brain that act exactly like current artificial intelligence, in that you have a neural network in there, and you're training it based on inputs to give ideal outputs. Mm-hmm. And so when you're consciously driving your brain in that mode, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of willpower, but we usually do it for fun things, so it's like we want to learn how to do this, so we spend the time to do it. Once that part is trained in there, then we start offloading that task to that basically preprocessor, and it handles all of it. So like when we're walking, or once you're proficient at driving or snowboarding, you're not thinking about any of that stuff consciously. Your conscious mind is off somewhere else, and you're passively doing all these things very, very effectively. And so we do have free will in the sense that we can go into that training mode and preload all this stuff. But once that's preloaded, if it's preloaded for things that we don't want in our life, like sex addiction or drug addiction or any of these types of things, it's very, very hard to turn on the training mode again for that thing that is built in there. Because, sorry, I guess I should back up a touch. So so your cerebellum is basically just handling like the raw kinetics of your body. So it's like moving your hands, it's doing all this. It's why I move my hands when I talk. Like I train myself to do that at some point in time. The limbic system is where that's where all the decision making is actually comes from, and that is actually a feeling based. So people talk about making decisions based on their gut. That's quite literally the only kind of decision that we actually make. It's all feeling based. And then the neocortex, that's our math processor. So that's the conscious mind. It's going to measure data and all this type of stuff. And so an ideal way to make a conscious decision is that you would use the data, measure it and all that. And then once all the numbers feel right, then you're going to say, that's my decision, and act on it.
Yeah.
So,
along those lines, when people argue about free will, they're not understanding the complexity of what it is to make a decision, and there's all these different parts to it. And I like to say the way that you treated that person today when they insulted you, well, you decided how you were going to treat that person when they insulted you probably years ago when you were processing those kinds of situations. So, yeah, it was your choice back then. It may not have been your choice when it happened, but you're the one who's responsible for the programming that caused you to have that immediate reaction. So, if somebody's a really terrible skier, then you wouldn't say that um, they're just not paying attention, or they're not being responsible with their skis, or whatever. You would say that they haven't taken the time to learn how to be a good skier.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody's really terrible in conversations, you wouldn't say, you need to be more responsible with your conversations necessarily. You would say you need to practice conversations, and you need to think about what's going on, and spend time processing it. And then character traits that are virtuous, like patience. But you can't just decide I'm going to be patient. You actually have to train to be a patient person.
Yeah.
You can't just decide to be thick-skinned. You have to have conversations with Calvinists, or
Well, but you're 100% right, and that's that's the real difficulty of things like addiction. So if your body has been trained that during stressful, difficult situations, I have these preset exits I can take. So alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever it may be. That if I do this, I'll get dopamine hits and I'll feel better.
Mhm.
Then all our brains do all our brain does is that there's the conscious writer that asks a question and the brain will generate an answer. And so really in life it comes down to what questions do you ask. And so if the question you're asking is, oh, I'm having stress right now, or oh, this is difficult, or oh, I hate my life, the brain's going to be like, okay, well, we've done these things in the past which gave us dopamine hits, which means that it was good, so let's go do one of those. And that's where for the addict, it feel they get into any kind of a difficult situation, and it's so hard for them not to just go into that automatic mode where their body is going to drive itself and go.
Yeah, somebody
that bad
drops you
action.
on the ski hill and you're a proficient skier, you're going to go into ski mode.
Yep.
That's just what you do. You don't stop and ask questions like, should I take my skis off and walk down to the bottom of the hill?
Right.
So the Bible talks about in Jude people who are like unreasoning animals, creatures of instinct. And in Romans, it talks about the carnal mind, which is at enmity with God. And so to be sort of animalistic, I guess you would say that's operating by the limbic system without applying the neocortex, or
the data processor.
Yeah, just so the ideas that we're talking about are in the Bible. It just uses different vocabulary to talk about them. And the thing that the Bible is encouraging people to do is to be spiritually minded, which to be spiritually minded requires you to put your limbic system on the table and look at what your natural instincts or natural cravings are, make some decisions, do some mathematical type predictions about where is it going if I continuously yield to my carnal desires, and should I go into training mode again and learn how to not, reprogram my limbic system. And you can actually do that. And I think there are people who don't realize that you can do that. You can learn to be more spiritually minded.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the issues that I have. So I am a Christian. I would profess to be. I was raised as such. I've walked away from my Christianity and found a way back. But so that's where I'm coming from. Where it's the correct opinion or not, I don't know. But one of the problems I've always had with Christianity is that it outsources the blame to other forces, which is it's a doing that takes away all your power to control what's happening. So if there's demons that are making me do this, it's like, hey, it's not me, it's this demon that I have. Well, really we should look at it is that everything in our life is our fault. All the good things, all the bad things, that's all our fault. And so that now empowers us to be like, well, if I'm the reason that all this stuff is going on, I now have the ability to go change it and affect it. And then the other thing is that, people don't realize how much their environments do affect them. And it's a cue system. And so, if you want to stop drinking soda, but I always say self-control starts at the grocery store. So if you want to eat healthy, buy healthy food, and then that's the only thing that's available throughout the week.
Yeah.
Or if you want to drink more water, have a water cup sitting next to you while you work.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to this idea. If you want to treat people right, then you're making decisions about how you're going to treat people maybe years ago based on how you're processing conversations and stuff. So you make this decision in the past that affects you in the future. You're still responsible, but time obviously is related to this, because at some point in time, whether that exists or not, you're making decisions about the kind of person you're going to be when you get dropped on the ski hill.
Yep. That's absolutely true. Yeah, we have these preconceived notions. I think it was Henry Ford that said it. It might be Lincoln, but basically, if you think you can do something, you're right, and if you think you can't do something, you're right. And so we set ourselves up. You see athletes do this. Like they'll be walking up to like take a shot in basketball or something like that, and they'll have already talked themselves out of making the shot before. And if you know what to look for, you can tell if they're going to do it. And the other is true too. Like they will walk in knowing that this is going to happen for them, and win the game off some miracle shot. And it's just like you're talking about. We can decide what's going to happen and then manifest that reality.
This is super weird, but like we were playing Settlers of Catan,
Great game.
And I was in this weird frame of mind. It's almost like you get plugged into a fast track and you're just moving on it, and you know what it's like to not be on it because you're constantly running into obstacles. So it's this weird place of total peace, and I could tell what the roles were going to be, and I started calling them before they were happening. And I need an 8, I'd roll it, it'd be an 8, and I did that like 3 times, and then I thought, this is too weird, and as soon as I thought this is too weird, and I tried to roll again, it's like, I know it's not going to work this time, and it didn't.
Yeah.
So like this is true on some level.
So let me ask you that. So in that situation, do you think that the act of you believing it is what was causing it to happen? Or do you think that you just were effectively like seeing into the future, to use like a poor way of looking at it, but like, were you seeing what was going to happen, or were you manifesting what was going to happen?
I don't actually know. One of the weirdest things that happened along those lines was out jumping on the trampoline, and the wind was just gusting like crazy, like 40, 50 mile an hour gusts. And I was trying to do flips and stuff, and it was really annoying, and completely in automatic mode, the jumps and things like that. And I turned the direction the wind was coming. I said, hey, knock it off. And it went and stopped instantly. It had been blowing for like hours, and I was out there for a good hour and a half longer, and there was never even a breeze after that. And as I'm thinking, like 20 minutes later, I'm going, that was weird. I didn't even think about turning and telling the wind to stop. Didn't even think about the fact that it had been blowing all day, and it did stop when I said that, and it hadn't, breezed again. And then, of course, I'm thinking about when Jesus rebuked the sea. And the thing is, it was so just gut reaction, turn and did it. No hesitation, no second guessing, no reasoning, no whatever. And when you look at when Jesus is talking about the person who has faith like a mustard seed.
Yeah, you can move mountains.
If you do not doubt in your heart. Well, that word doubt there, it's the word for reasoning. If you do not reason. So if you don't think about, well, this can't happen, and it's like you act in a way that is outside of the neocortex part, where you're going, this isn't possible, and yet.
Yeah, I feel and believe, like you feel so strongly that it's true in your deepest fiber.
Yes, and
so this is actually what brought. Sorry, you have an.
No, I'm in that weird space of people where I've actually prayed for somebody who had a cut tendon to be healed, and they were instantly healed, and then they could lift it and use their arm, and prayed for the cripple, and was walking without his cane and no pain anymore, and some other weird supernatural stuff that I've seen. But I've seen it work lots of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we'll get into more details, but what were you going to say?
Well, so what you're hitting on is actually the thing that brought me back. So my view of Christianity, and it still stands this day, is that it's correct, but it's not specific. We're talking about the language, so it's not talking about the quantum nature and blah blah blah, all that stuff, like the very specific ways that everything works. But it's not that it's incorrect. It just doesn't use that kind of language. And how could it? It's like 2,000 years old. Like the math and science didn't exist. There was no way to even talk about those concepts back then.
Yeah.
And so I completely walked away from Christianity, just in the sense that it was too. I didn't become a materialist because I don't believe that consciousness is of the material world. Like a rock, like is a rock good or evil? Let me ask you that.
Seems to be neither.
Right.
Yeah.
It just is. So it's like there has to be something else going on there before that question even makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew there was something else, but I spent a lot of time. I still continue to a decade researching successful people. Like what is it that they are tapping into that makes them successful? Because there's such a other thing. It's like you look at a professional athlete, and it's like it's that kind of person. That's not me. All that. And what I started to find is it was like a bunch of people standing around a circle, and they're trying to describe where the center was, and they were all saying the same thing, but it was each one was saying it a little bit different way. And until you get a bunch of different opinions, it's like you can't really form it, But as you get all those different opinions, you start to see where that center is as well. Mm-hmm. And the thing that they all kept going back to is that there's this universal law of the things that we feel deeply for to be true, that the universe is required to grant to us. And the Bible talks about this, that asking you shall receive. The law of attraction talks about this. Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, that's the only topic that it's on, is this: you manifest this reality. And so I was finding that I kept finding this from so many different sources. Mm-hmm. And these people, like 100%, they knew that this was a true fact. It's a fundamental way the universe works. And so I was like, man, so I got to believing that. And then I was having a conversation with a Christian friend, and we were talking, and I was just asking him first, like, hey, do you really believe in Jesus? Like, I know we all like to talk like he's God, but it's like, is that really what you believe? Yeah. And they're like, I don't even know if that matters as much, but what they said is that, there is effectively a test going on right now, and there's the group that's all this stuff is put out there, and it's just this question of, do you believe in an afterlife and what Christ stood for and all these things, or do you not? And that they were of the opinion that it's like if you choose to believe it, then you will be selected and be able to move on to that, and if you don't, then you're going to go a different way, and we don't know what that is, but and when I heard that, it suddenly resonated so strongly that this universal law that like the things that we believe makes them true, and then there's this decision out there if we can be part of this afterlife. And so it brought me back, realizing that it's like if you believe that the Christianity way of looking at things is true, it is for you, and if you don't, then it's not true for you. And it literally just comes down to that choice.
Yeah, it becomes incredibly complicated to sort out everything that's going on when you start thinking about that. When a person who is part of Christianity is asked a question like, do you believe Jesus is God? We all know what we're supposed to say, and we all know what we can't say in order to keep our position as part of the in group.
Right.
But if we're totally honest about what we actually think, a lot of times it's, we're not even putting it together. We just know the words we're supposed to use when that question is posed to us.
That's correct.
But if we were to sit quietly and imagine, how do I actually view God? How do I actually view Jesus? Do I actually know or have any idea what one being but three distinct persons means? I have a way of relating to that, or is it just meaningless words to me? I think what we actually believe and what we claim to believe in order to maintain our position in the in-group, they're completely different worlds.
Mhm.
Like I know the words that I'm supposed to use when I'm talking about God. But if I think about what God is like, really, it's changing all the time. It's like I have a different view of God if I've watched a Marvel movie, and then I go to pray and I realize my prayers are geared towards the hero myth
Mm.
in some way, because the Marvel movies all capture this hero story in some way. If I've been to a particular church service that's talking about the kindness of God towards people who are lost, well, that's going to affect my view of God. And so it's incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
And when I've been part of some of these weird, like supernatural groups, like the hyper Pentecostal,
Sure. Yeah.
where
Evangelistic
yeah,
Episcopalians, and
I've been in the
I have some good
situation.
stories around that stuff too. But
Yeah, I'd
keep
be
going.
interested to
Keep
hear.
going.
I've been in a situation where I knew, just like I know you're wearing a purple shirt, that this person is going through a divorce right now. You look at somebody like going through a divorce,
Yep.
and you walk up and say, "Hey, I know you're going through a divorce, and here's what you need to know." And I know that this is what they need to hear, and they're confused. Who are you? Who gave you my name? How did you know about that? And you do it, and there's no doubt whatsoever, and you carry it out. Are you like, that person is going to be healed? You walk up, you pray for them, they get healed. And then there's the times when it's like somebody's pressuring you. Why don't you go pray for that person? And you don't think it's going to happen,
Mhm.
and you pray anyway, and the thing does happen. So the reality of surprise, the fact that we can be surprised, makes me question the whole idea of the law of attraction. Like there's something more to it. The fact that you could be imagining the universe in a particular way, trying to, believe that this is going to happen, and I could be believing it in a different way. Well, then who wins? Is it the
Mhm.
person with the stronger will? And even if the law of attraction is true on some level, or completely, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't other beings in the universe who are willing it to happen a different way. It wouldn't exclude the existence of a God who has maybe mastered the law of attraction, if you want to think of it that way. If we're gonna take the law of attraction and reduce it down to faith to make whatever you want happen, well, then God is able to do whatever He wants with the physical universe.
Right, which means that we could. Is it Descartes who talks about the deceiver, the infinitely powerful deceiver
Maybe.
things? And yeah, I agree. You can go down that road. So I would say that this law only works within the reasonable, and it also only works for like the act of something being deeply embedded into your mind means that that is something that is eligible for this law to apply to. But the things that are whimsical or completely outside of the fabric of the universe, in the sense of like violating physics and all this type of stuff,
Mhm.
obviously those things won't apply
Yeah.
to it.
When I was really into BMX and I started really winning a lot of races and moving up, and you're flying over the track, and there's like this 25, 30 foot tabletop jump. You fly over it,
Hmm.
and you when you're in the air and you're not sure if you're going to make it over the double, you just automatically you tap your back wheel, and it sort of pushes you up, and then you drop the nose and you go over this thing. So you could be like almost clear the double, but there's this big thing that you're about ready to smash into, and you instinctively just tap the back wheel and you go over. You get into
Hmm.
that mode, and you are operating in that space of absolutely no doubt.
Yep.
You know exactly what you're doing, and to watch that is amazing. You see people who are like pro expert racers, and they're doing this stuff, and to be able to do it, to fly up in the air, you could clear the jump. You're not sure if you're going to clear it, but it doesn't matter. So you do an air manual,
Hmm.
which is where you like your wheel never touches the ground as you're flying over these jumps, but you move it in the air as if it's touching the ground.
Yeah.
And it's this weird thing where you're like riding physically just above the surface of it looks so cool, and it's so natural. And then I'm doing this, and all of a sudden I'm rolling down the backside of the double going, what just happened?
Hmm.
I don't remember doing anything that would cause me to crash. And what happened was that the crank arm had snapped in half. As I was going up, there was like enough pressure, and it was just for some reason that was when it chose to break. So I'm going up this double jump, and then effectively my foot just goes into the ground because the whole crank arm is broken in half, and the pedal's gone. And the next thing I know, I'm sort of waking up in a haze with 5 broken ribs, a punctured or a collapsed lung. My shoulder blade is shattered. My collarbone is broken in half in 2 places, and didn't see that coming. So clearly, there's more operating there than just the law of attraction. Because I was in that zone. I was in that frame of mind where there's zero doubt. Just like when I, rebuked the wind, felt exactly the same. But then reality comes in and smacks me upside the head. So there's
Sure.
It's like the law of attraction is true, but it seems to only go so far. It's like it's one part of the equation.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I mean, another part of the equation is, what's your timeline on things happening? Unfortunately, you don't get to choose that when you're dealing with the law of attraction. I think that's what makes a lot of people fall off and not achieve their dreams, is that they have these desires and they put it out there as they should, but they say, I want it to be done in a month or 2 months, and you're 3 years out.
Yeah.
So in those situations,
It's interesting that, we're talking about the law of attraction, and in conservative Christian circles, you might as well be saying, law of attraction is synonym with summoning the devil and bowing down to him as your Lord and Master. Some people are so freaked out by the term law of attraction, and I understand why. It's because it's one of those labels that's associated with the occult and with the new age and with these super hyper shallow.
Well, it's a
creatures,
competing theory. I mean, whether Christians like it or not, science is a competing religion, and it's winning. And I think that the law of attraction is a different explanation for the one that the Christians put out, which is that God is the one granting these things. And so the Christians feel more comfortable. And again, I consider myself one, but I would say that the Christians feel more comfortable thinking of God as a genie, and that feels safer, that you're like running it through another check.
Yeah, because then we're not responsible.
Yeah, right. As opposed to it being a universal law that exists.
Determinism, or another word for determinism would be sin nature, or you could say original sin, or total depravity, or God's sovereignty. Or we have a lot of these kinds of terms that we throw around, that the person who holds those ideas to be important is the kind of person who does not want to be personally responsible for their own sin or for their effect on other people. Because you can just say, well, God meant that to happen. God meant for me to say that stupid thing. God meant for me to sin, or I have a sin nature, I can't help it, or it's Adam's fault, or whatever. So we have these ways of thinking about reality that are really to alleviate our guilt. And we don't realize that arguing for God's sovereignty in a particular way doesn't make that true, and it doesn't make you less responsible. It just gives you the illusion that it wasn't your fault.
Well, I mean, the Catholics, it's like you outsource it to the priest, right? You can do whatever you want. You show up, hey, I'm sorry. Okay, cool. Say a couple prayers, you're good.
Yeah, if you're wealthy enough, you just pay indulgences.
Yeah, and that's the whole fundamental misunderstanding, is that it doesn't really it can't have anything to do with your actions. It's just that there's this open question. And if you are trying to go one way, then you will. And if you're trying to go the other way, then you will. And we get caught up on everything. It's like it's a wives' tale, whatever that's called these days, what you can say. The porcupines shoot their quills. It's not true.
Right.
But the message there is stay away from porcupines, and that's a good message,
Or the gun is always loaded.
The gun's always loaded. It's not always loaded, but it's a good idea to always treat it as if it's loaded. And the Bible is full of these kinds of things that aren't specifically true, but the message that you get from believing that it were true is helpful to living a good life.
There's a practice, because we cannot become experts in every field. So we're not going to be experts at gunsmithing, But if you have a gun, then to just treat it like it's always loaded is the default way of doing it. If you're going to advance beyond that and get into like making your own guns, you cannot practically treat them as if they're loaded all the time, because you're pulling them apart and you're looking down the barrel as you're crafting it before it's even attached to the other part of the gun. And there's this, more sophisticated way of doing that. What these conversations, for the person who wants to understand this stuff as it truly is, it's more complex than just everything is determined.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one of the best deterministic passages in Scripture is Isaiah chapter 10, where it says, it will come to pass when God is finished with his punishing of the nation of Israel via the king of Assyria, that God will punish the king of Assyria for what he's using the king of Assyria to do in Israel, not because of what he's doing, but because of how he's thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, I will punish the fruit of his stout heart, for he says, it is by my hand that I have spoiled these nations, and blah, blah, blah. And he's, this big boast where God is making fun of it. And then God says, shall the staff boast against the one who is lifting it up? Shall the axe boast against the one who is chopping, as if the axe is the one who is cutting down the tree? And so you have God sovereignly controlling the fact that he's going to be king. He's going to be given this power. He's going to be given this much charisma. He's going to be followed by these people and born into this family. And I'm going to raise him up to be this wicked, horrible person. And then I'm going to use him to judge the nation. But his role in this, that he's responsible, is also part of this. The way that he's processing these things, his perspective on this is wrong. Those are his decisions that he's making.
Mm-hmm.
Like the wicked are God's sword. Well, it's not God's fault for using the wicked to be his sword. He just chooses wicked people when he needs to bring destruction on somebody. It's the wicked person's fault for being wicked. So it's not that God is totally sovereign, and it's not that humans are totally sovereign. Both are happening. There are some parts that man is doing, and there are some parts that God is doing. And it's not always clear which parts God is doing and which part man is doing. Yep. But it seems, it's like you can try to create a summary of all these things, but it's always going to be wrong because it's more complicated than that. It's like, whose fault is it that my son skipped school? Well, is it the fact that I forgot to set my alarm clock? Is it the fact that he fought with me in the car until, I couldn't get him in the car? It's like there's a lot going on. There are multiple factors. You can't simplify it down to one thing. You have multiple beings.
Yeah.
Even if you have God and you have man, some things are my fault, some things are God's fault or responsibility, some things are my responsibility. It's always more nuanced and more complicated than the doctrines that we try to make to like pigeonhole every event into like a Calvinist determinist worldview.
Well, right, because it's, what is going on there is that humans have a finite amount of memory, and the data compression to communicate those memories, speech, takes time. And so you have to be able to simplify things down to say that this thing is this, and then be done and move on. And that's not how it works. I mean, in a lot of cases, it doesn't even make sense to try and catalog this stuff. Like sometimes people aren't good or evil. They just are, They're not trying to do a good or evil thing, or they're doing good from their perspective.
So
whose perspective is correct?
It's like certain people don't do the thinking thing. That is a loud ringtone.
That's funny. So one thing I wanted to throw out there is breaking the Christian model down and ripping away most of it just down to its core perspective of you have these three basic characters in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus.
Okay.
In between. I think that's actually a really good way to look at things from a human's perspective, whether or not it's exactly accurate to like the fabric of existence. I'll never know. I don't know who will, if anyone will, but to say that, so let me redefine those three things.
Okay.
So you have the Holy Spirit, and let's define that as consciousness. So you have this conscious observer that exists out there. The feelings that it experiences are love and jealousy, hate and joy, and all these types of things. So it's like
Okay.
the raw emotion is the way that it is going to experience the universe. It finds itself basically waking up inside of this created universe by some kind of being which had an intelligent design, or at least that the way that the universe works is extremely consistent, and we'll use the word mechanical. That it's like physical objects always work in a repeatable way, like a machine would
Mhm.
work. And that there is this person that was born and stuff the normal way, whether through immaculate conception or otherwise, I don't think actually ends up mattering. But they're born, that much we all agree on, and that they grow up and believe so strongly that they are the Son of God that they manifest that to the point that they actually are the Son of God, and that they live a short life, in such a way that in emulating that ensures you that you can be part of another kind of plane of existence.
So, in a practical sense, I'm already a heretic, so it doesn't matter. I can say this. It
Say it
kind of
anyways.
it kind of doesn't matter if, because for one thing, we don't even know what any of these terms mean, but it it kind of doesn't matter if Jesus is really the Son of God. If the question is, how do we obtain immortality? Because he obtains immortality,
Yep.
and he he says, like, I'm the forerunner. I'm the first fruits. I am manifesting the way. If you want to obtain immortality, you must walk this path that I've walked. We must suffer with him.
Mm-hmm.
There's, what is it? Philippians 3:10 is the verse to look up when it's talking about a summary of the Christian faith. It's to know him. So knowing God, the power of his resurrection, to partake of his sufferings, to be conformed to the likeness of his death. So he is rising above his limbic system, the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
He has the flesh. He has the limbic system. He has the hunger and the thirst and the sexual impulses. And he feels all of those things. He is aware of them. To him, they are like another being that is talking, and that's the way that it is
For all of us.
Well, it should be for all of us. People tend to be on some kind of a spectrum, but between more instinctual, animalistic, and more sort of reason, you could say logos / faith. We have carefully examined these things. We have come to certain conclusions. That is the logos coming to a point of understanding, and the Bible uses the words reason and faith together for that kind of thing. So Jesus he's manifesting this, and it's like, I counted 130 something. Every time I refer to it, I think it goes up because I find new ones, but at least 130 different times in the New Testament where it says the stuff that people did not understand, Jesus is manifesting it by all of the things that he's doing. It's revealing this powerful new way of thinking that can transform you, that can give you power over the flesh, whereas the flesh was your master before. You now become slaves of righteousness. You were slaves of your lust, and now you're a slave of righteousness. You have been conformed to the likeness of death, crucified the flesh with its passions and its lusts, that kind of thing. So, is Jesus the Son of God? Well, there are people who say, and I don't understand why they say this, but they say, if Jesus is not God, then you have no salvation. There is no salvation. And they have some word salad way of going around in some big theological circle with certain terms where you can make a kind of argument that seems valid, but it's all in that realm of word thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You have to use these words in this particular way. And, sensu, is that who the map is not the territory?
Yeah.
Yeah. The word is not the thing. The word is supposed to be a pointer to that thing. So if I say faith and you say law of attraction, or Jesus says, if you have faith and do not doubt, then you can say to this mountain, be removed, and you say law of attraction. Well, if in our heads we're talking about the same thing, then the labels are just an unfortunate
That's
restriction.
Well,
Or
you're completely right, and I think that's why it's important to use a lot of different words to describe things, because we have so many labels that come along with it. Like when you say faith, it conjures up a whole number of past experiences I've had, and all these things I've been told about. And so sometimes, in order to get at a deeper understanding, you have to use a bunch of different words. And that's why I say it's like the people standing around that circle trying to describe the center.
Yeah.
That it's in its words. It's what you're talking about. So it's like, if you can describe the same thing in 30 different ways and really understand what they mean by all 30 of those, what you'll find is that there'll be like one or two, which is just like, it like opens the door. So it's like, oh, I completely get this at a level I've never understood it before.
Yeah. This is part of maturity, to recognize that, like, if you're talking to a Mormon or, a Calvinist, or a new Christian, or an atheist, or whatever, they're throwing out all these words that are trigger words for us that we associate with something. You're talking about something completely different, and so you're talking past each other. You're not actually communicating. And
the trigger thing, I just want to touch. A big problem with it is that if what you're trying to say, like if you want it to be true, so you're effectively trying to get others to believe it's true, to reinforce that you think it's true, that's where the triggering comes from. If you're just looking for truth, there is no triggering.
Yeah. Well, that is really the big question. Like, what should our orientation be? What should our motive be? When I did a Google search for law of attraction, and you end up with all these motivational speaker type people. You end up with a lot of like prosperity gospel preachers. You end up with these really shallow like they call it narcigesis, these people who use narcigesis to interpret the Bible, like the Bible is all about me. You end up with these really like success driven, self-care, self-centered ideas. And the law of attraction is really appealing to these kinds of sort of shallow, self-centered people who are stuck on like a personal ambition is their thing. They want success. And you're already defining success in a way that's completely different from these people.
Yes.
And the people who are warning against the law of attraction, and it's usually I don't know why, but if you look up on YouTube videos on why the law of attraction is demonic, or it's a version of Gnostic occultism or something like that, it's almost always these Christian ladies who are young and have the sort of the perfect house and the perfect hair, and have this following of similar people. It's like there's a certain demographic of people that really get into the law of attraction idea, get burned by it, and then go into just sort of labeling it. So the law of attraction is demonic. The law of attraction is New Age. The law of attraction is Satan. And here's why. And then they point at things that are suspicious. So I can't remember her name, but there's a lady who channels multiple spirits that one of them identifies as Abraham or something. You can look that up. The lady who's an advocate of the law of attraction who channels Abraham. You look that up and you'll find that she's really popular as an advocate of this. And a lot of people, like in Joe Rogan, he interviews some people who talk about this lady, and so it's a big thing. Well, the fact that she's channeling spirits that are promoting the law of attraction, for the Christian, that's a red flag for somebody who is wary of doctrines of demons. I mean, certainly there are doctrines of demons that are out there
Absolutely.
that have profoundly negative effects on a person, could even turn a person away from saving truth so that they don't inherit eternal life if they're buying these doctrines of demons. And so clearly there are demons who are promoting some version of the law of attraction, but it's just more nuanced than that. It's more complicated than that. And part of the reason that it's so fuzzy and it's hard to pin down what's really going on, people who are raging against the law of attraction, they don't have anything to say about it other than it's demonic. It's
Right.
demonic because of this. And so to get down to the bottom of how should we view this? Well, you have to come back to this idea of what are we orienting towards in the first place? One of the big problems with like Bill Johnson's church, which I can't think of the name of right now, but it's this famous hyper-Pentecostal church where he's trying to pull ideas from the New Age movement and Christianize them. It's like it's time for the Christians to take back the power that's in the hands of the enemy. So he's reading a lot of New Age philosophy and Spiritism and promoting some of these ideas. And then the Christian conservative ladies group is saying, look, he's New Age, look what he's doing. And nobody's really making good sense out of anything that's going on. And it's really frustrating. But at least part of the answer is within those Pentecostal circles is this pursuit of supernatural power. Like,
yeah, they want to use God like a genie.
Yeah, like the power is
like,
the point.
I want to be God. I know better.
And
that's always what it comes down to.
Like Todd White, for example, he argues that all of us have this innate craving for the supernatural. And that's why people are turning to the New Age, and they're turning to Christianity, but Christianity doesn't believe that the supernatural is for us today. And so he's making the same mistake that Augustine made. Augustine said, all of us have this insatiable lust for women and, the need to have multiple mistresses. And so that must be, and he's projecting that thing that's within him onto everybody else and just making wild assumptions based on the fallacy of illicit transference. It's true here. It must be true everywhere. No, It's not like that.
Well, I think a lot of people have pretty boring lives.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very exciting to consider that there's this adversary out there and there's demons and all this stuff. It kind of makes the world a bit magical, It's like it makes it a bit like we're living in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I mean, another thing that you said earlier, talking about the hate, the opposite of love is not hate. It's indifference.
Well, I used to say the opposite of love would be selfishness, but
it's indifference.
It's more like you could put indifference and love and hate and selfishness on some kind of a chart.
Yeah,
and see how they're related to each other.
Well, it's you have this spectrum, and it's how much influence is this other thing, idea, entity, whatever, allowed to have in my life. And so whether it's a lot or a little, if it's a lot or a little, that has to do with like how much you care. And then after that can be a positive or negative, influence on you. So you can love or you can hate something vehemently, but you still care about it a lot. But on the other side, I mean, the opposite, it's like if you have no caring, it's like it doesn't matter what it does.
Yeah, you almost have to define these things when you throw them out there. So like selfishness would be, I want to feel pleasure and I don't care what other people feel. So selfishness tends to exploit others. And agape is, I want other people to have pleasure, joy, good things. Maybe pleasure is too specific a word, but I want other people to have positive experiences. And how that affects me in terms of comfort, I don't care. But if agape love, that need for others to be lifted up, that anguish when other people are down, if that is present within you and you are able to satisfy what it craves by helping the homeless guy get his life back together, or helping the child who is hurt, or helping the lost person who is confused, then you're stimulating, or you're satisfying the cravings that agape love has.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody would ever define that as selfish.
No, it's
So
not. Well, and that's one of the other things that like the elites, they get demonized a lot. But I live most of my life around what people would consider elites, not political elites, but just in the business world.
yeah,
Wildly successful people, entrepreneurs. And what you'll find is that the uh the only, like, if you want to get, so I want to get, it's
okay,
like I've got a certain money amount that I want so I can go race. I want to be in a nice house for my family. It's like I have wants.
yeah,
I unabashedly, like, there's some things there. The only way to actually achieve those things is to give more than what you're receiving. That's literally the only path. And when we get upset is that, like, let's say, like, take, like, in a company where you've got employees and then you've got the company. Employees very typically have a taking relationship from the company, and the company will tolerate that type of immature relationship because of the value that they're extracting out of that employee's work. And in those situations, which unfortunately is the norm, it's an adversarial relationship, and so you don't end up having very much happy on either side
yeah.
with
It's
that exchange.
mutually parasitic, basically.
Mutually parasitic, that's right. But on the other side, the most successful people live in just wild abundance, and it's the product that they sell. They sell it for this much, and the amount of value that the people getting that pay for it is this much, like in a measurable way. It's like, I
Mm.
cost 10 grand for this, but it makes you $100,000 on your bottom line, and we can measure exactly where those two things are. And then those same people will turn and just wildly bless their employees with trust and wealth and ownership and decision making ability and all that stuff, and so the employees are totally happy, and it's like the whole thing works, and it's just this obsessive giving relationship. Like, I am just giving to you so fast and so much that you can't help but give back to me, and it's just, it makes
Yeah,
everything work. And that's the only real way to success. Like, the other one is that you steal from some of these people so you can give to others. Like BlackRock, the company. I mean, they are literally stealing from the foundation of the economic engine of the world so that they can highly reward their customers. And so the customers are happy and keep doing business with them because they're making so much money, but the rest of the world is being taken advantage of. And that is a situation where you have, like, the lizard people elites.
well, if they are like a cancer, uh, then they will eventually destroy the system and themselves with it.
Yep.
So the law of attraction,
Take cancer literally. I mean, you literally look at what the cell is doing.
yeah,
It stops acting selflessly, and it starts putting out that, hey, I'm giving this much worth and value through chemical messengers. I need this many resources, and then it's building itself up, but it's not actually completing the action under the hood of acting like a liver or a heart or anything like that.
yeah. So it's like a perfect metaphor to use cancer as a
It
metaphor.
is.
So the law of attraction, as I've researched it and trying to figure out what it is, the fact that demons are promoting it, well, that's interesting. The fact that these big Pentecostal churches that are doing what I would call Christian witchcraft are promoting it, well, that's also interesting. I would say that the law of attraction is kind of like a rock. It's like
Yeah.
you can hit somebody in the head with a rock, and then that would be bad. So the Todd White version of this is just to assume everybody's craving power. And it's very shallow to just crave power. Like, you have tremendous power if you're holding a stick. You can hit somebody in the face with it or stab somebody with it. And it's like to say, to crave supernatural power, or to crave, like, wouldn't it be great to have a genie, or to crave massive amounts of money? Wouldn't it be great to have lots of money? I think that's the kind of thing that a person who has absolutely no clue about, like, what is meaningful what is worth doing, they're putting off the question.
Well, it's power, I would say in most cases is probably better substituted with the word influence. That these people crave a huge amount of influence.
Well, influence, you could say like the ability to get people motivated to do a particular thing. That would be a kind of power. And
Yeah.
money, like, yeah, I'll give you $1,000 if you'll bark like a dog. If you have money, you have that. If you have, a really cool machine that does something, well, you have power and that kind of thing. But having lots of power, having lots of influence, having lots of money, having, the ability to having like perfect understanding of the secret or the law of attraction. So let's say you have that. Well, now what?
Yeah.
I
What are you going to use it for?
Yeah, I wrote a couple of sci-fi books, and that was like one of the primary questions that I wanted to explore. Not like how to get power or how to get influence, but like if you had infinite power, well, now what?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this one conversation between the guy and the girl. He has omnipotent power. Basically, beings from another dimension step down and give him a device that, or the ability to just whatever you will, it will happen. So he can be like float up in the air and everybody floats up in the air. He can be like this wall doesn't exist and it just ceases to exist. So he has omnipotent power over the physical universe. And he says, well, I could cure all diseases. And his girlfriend's like, don't do that. That's stupid. You start giving other people whatever they want or whatever they think they need, then you're going to end up being everybody's personal genie. And then all these people are going to be miserable. It's like
the instant destruction of society would be removing death. Like if you don't get old and die,
yeah,
like society is over in 20 years.
Well, or if you removed all suffering.
Well, suffering is the only thing that people, like if you look back at any happy memory, it probably had a fair amount of suffering in it.
Yeah. And imagine that if I, hit you in the face with a hammer or I give you a cup of coffee, it produces exactly the same results. Because none of our decisions have any consequences, positive or negative, anymore. Suddenly life loses all meaning. And it's kind of like once you've hacked the video game, you lose interest in it.
It's 100% true. Yeah.
So the idea of what if I had infinite power? You have no idea what you're asking for.
Oh, you'd be bored immediately and miserable.
Yeah. Well, except for the fact that you still have a whole world full of people in various states of contentment or discontentment or whatever. And if you have tremendous power or influence, like, say you have a podcast that's growing in popularity and the ideas that you're putting out could potentially affect somebody for the positive. Like, somebody who has a very shallow understanding of these ideas might rethink it, might suddenly take a few steps back and have a little bit more humility and be a little bit more objective about what the Christians are saying, that the law of attraction is demonic, and what the narcissistic sociopathic pastors are saying, the law of attraction is going to give you everything you want. They just say, well, both of these are wrong,
Yeah, for sure they are. For sure they are. Is that you have the ability to obtain the things that are dearest in your heart. That's the takeaway, but not that you can get whatever you want.
Where do you put godliness with contentment into that? Because that's contrasted in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think you should ever be content. You can be happy and strive. And you need to realize that you need to be enjoying the journey as it goes. So like me, like I've been grinding and like skipping social events and like putting work above everything else for like 20 straight years. And it led me it led me into being suicidal this last year when I took my biggest shot and came up short. And I wanted to put a gun in my mouth. And it was my wife talking to me of like, hey, you gotta like enjoy some of this too.
Yeah.
And so you look at people that are successful, like wholeheartedly successful, like every aspect of life. These people are widely successful. Like Rob Dyrdek is like a great one because he loves to talk about this. He's financially successful in this area, and then he dedicates a large amount of time to just like being with his family and friends and like having as much fun as he possibly can. And that's what it is. It's it's the serenity prayer. You know,
Yeah.
it's being happy where you are now and enjoying the ride and knowing what you can achieve and striving for that. But contentment's terrible. I mean, contentment is like retirement. I'm all done. That's the worst. I mean, that's the kiss of death. You are gonna start dying. That's
Well,
you shrinking into nothing.
you're using contentment to point at a very specific thing. And passages like Philippians 4 are using the same word to point at something else. So when Paul says,
Yeah.
I've learned the secret, a different word, different use of the word secret, not the book, The Secret, not the law of attractions, The Secret, but he said, I've learned the secret of being content in all circumstances. To be able to have, like, your house burns down and you're like, oh, well, that's interesting, that's a thing that happened,
Mm-hmm.
this will create an
It's very
interesting series
stoic.
of events. Or, oh, I just won the lottery, well, that's a thing that happened, this will create some also interesting events. To be able to look at whatever is happening, and in his position, he believes that God is a player in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so if this thing happened to me, it's not like the loving God who cares about me and is trying to produce in eternal life in me. It's not like God wasn't paying attention when my house burned down. It's more like God is working everything together for my good because of his love for me and his infinite wisdom. The fact that he's not trying to create a person who is comfortable and lives in a nice house. He's trying to create a person who is fit for eternal life. And if burning the house down is part of that journey, then we should view the house that burned down, or the family member that died, or the car wreck that crippled us, or whatever. We should view that as part of the journey to inheriting immortality.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus's journey to immortality and being able to bring other people along with that journey took him to the cross. Well, that's not a comfortable place to be.
Yeah, but it's only like 16 hours or 30 hours or whatever.
Yeah, it's not the only time he suffered. I mean, the rejection and
Sure.
as I've been on this path of what I would say a biblical definition of Christianity, which is to be Christ-like, it results in a lot of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say contentment versus when Paul says contentment, these are the same word pointing at two completely different ideas.
Sort of. I mean, contentment. Would you not define contentment as the lack of striving that you
I would
or
say
you're accepting where things are?
no. I would define contentment as the ability to be at peace while I'm trying to change reality around me because I see where I want it to go. And when some chaos is thrown into the mix, like you break every bone in your body all of a sudden because of a freak accident, to be okay with that event, and the reason that I'm okay with that event is because I do believe that God is a real player in this universe,
Mm-hmm.
that he does uphold all things by the power of his word, that in him we live and move and have our being, that it is his word that brings it all into existence and that sustains it. And so if something like that that's completely outside of my control happens, I don't view it as it's a freak accident. I don't view it as it's a terrible thing. I view it as, why did God do that? And if I believe in his goodness, kindness, love, him working eternal life in me, then I'm going to do my best to receive that event as a good thing, let it have the impact on my character that it's supposed to have. So I have a good attitude about it.
Yeah.
I can embrace suffering.
Outcome independence.
Yeah. In Colossians,
Yeah.
Paul prays.
But do you think that there's a conscious choice in all these things that's happening?
Well, I definitely think it's a conscious, like, thinking is engaging in an activity that requires effort on my part, and I think it's like the only thing. It's certainly
But not your thinking. God. Do you think
Well, my
God
thinking.
is having a conscious choice to do these things?
I do think that God is, based on how the Bible describes God, and granted, the picture of God changes. It's like you get more and more data about what God is really like from Genesis. Once you get through the end of the Bible, it's sort of like the picture is getting clearer and clearer and more precise and more accurate. And then the probably the most explicit picture of God is Jesus himself, who is the exact representation of his person. And he is definitely thinking, he's definitely feeling, he's definitely conversing, he's definitely doing this and not doing that. Jesus said, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons which God has placed under his own power, which means there are certain things that God has placed under his own power. The implication being there are other things that are happening by some other means. So yeah, I think of God as...
Well, so take your example where you come home, your house is burned down. Okay, I'm going to be like, Paul, why did God do this? Well, I mean, is that what you really think happened? Like the circuit breaker that was faulty from the manufacturer? Or take your bike wreck. I mean, do you think that God drove you to that bike, or that
I do.
The flaw was put in there on God's part, the machine or whatever, there was some imperfection in the metal,
the way
set
that
back thousands of years to be injected. That means
that's how I believe that that's happening. That's the way that I operate, and I have reasons for that. Part of it is because that's the picture that emerges if you're honest with what Scripture says. And I do think that the Bible is the Word of God. Another reason is because that's how it plays out in reality. And I've been in so many situations where that's the only, well, it's the Occam's razor explanation for what's going on. So the most traumatic moment in my life, it wasn't, when I got hit by a car that time, or when I broke every bone in my body that time, or when I was arrested by the Romanian Coast Guard, or when I had to jump off a moving train in a third world country, or interesting stuff. But it was an emotionally traumatic thing. It was the going from, I was very isolated growing up, had no friends, it was just the family. And I finally broke out of that situation, started developing a social life, because I was homeschooled and I worked for the family business. So up until the time I was like 19 years old, I had almost no contact with anyone other than my own family. And it was very, it was just,
we get a big diversity of opinions.
Yeah, and I didn't have any meaningful connections.
Yeah,
because my relationship with my family was also very cold and very distant. So I was lacking community in the worst way. I finally get plugged into a community and start making friends and start having things to do with other people. And I was feeling accepted and part of something. And it was incredibly, it was so much more meaningful than anything that I had ever encountered. And then God entered into the equation and said, I want you to do something that is going to cause all of these people to reject you. It's going to put you on the outside. And then God confirmed it by obvious supernatural things that were completely outside of my control. And I made the decision to do what I knew was it was the moral thing to do. And it was also what it was clear that God wanted me to do. And I faced the fact that this whole group that I had now become part of was going to reject me. And so sure enough, they're all rejecting me. The miraculous part of it hasn't happened yet, but based on what I've seen so far, I know the miraculous part is going to happen. And as this is going on, there's this nagging thought. It's like, imagine somebody is following you around, poking you, just poking you constantly and saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it was Romans 2:29. And I didn't know, there's more to this story, but I don't want to go into all the details. But imagine somebody's just poking you and going, Romans 2:29, Romans, and you have no idea what it says. And it happens every time you're in the situation. And so when it all comes to a head and you're screaming at God, like, God, how dare you force me into a situation where doing the right thing is going to cause my whole community to put me on the outside, and I'm going to go back to being by myself. And so I did. I was on the mountaintop screaming at God. And the next day it's like, okay, fine. I'm going to look up Romans 2:29 and see what it says. And it says essentially, the one who has truly given his heart to serving God, his praise comes from God. It does not come from man. So I had been living my whole life up to this point trying to find a group that would accept me. I finally find it, and God's like, nope. And then I come to, my praise comes from God, it does not come from man. And so, well, it brought me to that point of, I'm okay with that. It brought me back to a point of peace. And then the miraculous thing that needed to happen was a couple of days later, I needed to be on a plane to Europe, and there was no plane ticket, and there was no money to buy a plane ticket. But I understood that there was this hand guiding all of these circumstances, bringing it all to this point. And if it's to be confirmed, then I'm going to be on that plane and I'm going to be in Europe. So I show up at the meeting, who doesn't have your plane ticket? Who doesn't have your money? And I'm like, I got nothing. They're like, somebody paid for your whole trip. So anonymous person, like I didn't, everybody was doing the missionary support letters. I did none of that because I showed up at the last minute based on, I had a dream, and the stuff in the dream started happening in real life. I came across a verse in Isaiah that says only God can predict the future in this way. So I concluded that the fact that the dream was telling me what all these things were going to be had to be from God. The next thing is, I'm on a plane to Europe with this group of people. And it's like, there's no way for that to happen. So literally, like, I don't know, a few days before the plane left, still had no ticket. It was a very specific itinerary with certain stops. It had been booked for months, and randomly 2 people who had exactly the same European vacation plan, like at the last minute, called and canceled right when I got the money. And so
let me ask you this. So in that situation, where'd that money come from?
It ended up being an anonymous person who was aware of what was going on, came and paid for the whole thing.
Yeah. And that's, so I guess it's the trouble with, I think the trouble with looking at, well, first of all, I don't think that God violates physics. I don't.
Okay.
And I think that exists because it would violate a promise that God is not a deceiver to us. And so if they're not going to be a deceiver, they can't be like changing the rules all the time. Like we all agree upon a set of rules.
I don't really have a problem with God deceiving people, to be perfectly honest, because,
well, if that's the case, then it's an enter into madness, because it's like, if that's the deception, like where could that end?
I started calling this the Ezekiel 13 principle.
Well, hold on. So the one thing I wanted to, so somebody had some kind of calling, and had a sense to give and be generous, and threw money in, which linked up with you and caused all this stuff to happen. So it's like it did happen, but it's like the faith of a mustard seed. You can move a mountain. Well, do you have restrictions on how that mountain's going to move?
You could invent a backhoe.
Right. So so if it's 10,000 backhoes and earth movers and all this kind of stuff, is that still God moving it? Is it all those people? It's like, well, I don't know. Where are you going to draw the line?
I don't.
The mountain is moved.
Because like I've said, I've walked up to somebody with absolutely no confidence that they're going to be healed, but I prayed for them anyway, and they got healed. And it's like, well, clearly it had nothing to do with my faith in that moment. And then I've been in situations where I had absolutely no doubt, and I just said the thing and it happened. And in that case, it's like, it felt like it was my faith causing this to happen. In this other situation, I would say it absolutely was not my faith. It was something else causing it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the metaphor of a father-son relationship is all over the Bible. You have God working with us to basically produce the divine in us. We're becoming partakers of the divine nature. We're becoming the sons of God. We're becoming divine beings slowly, and it's a process. And so when we're walking with God in these situations, and he's teaching us about how to do what he does, in some cases, he answers our prayers and he does it. In other cases, he's developed in us the ability to cause certain things to happen. So the people who are trying to figure out which is it, well, they're not understanding that the situation is more complex than that. Mm-hmm. Like if you have a spiritual gift, like the spiritual gifts described in the Bible, there are people who have practiced their spiritual gift, who have within them the faith or the power or the thing, and it's at their control. The spirit of the prophets is subject to the prophets, and they can choose to engage it or they can choose not to. and you have a command of it, just like somebody who is a world-class athlete can jump on that bike and pedal to the top of a mountain.
Yep.
So it's not a cut and dry thing. There's a lot going on. Sometimes it's God answering the prayer. Sometimes it's you understanding the situation and writing this insanely complicated code that accomplishes a thing that's it's sort of prophetic or
For
miraculous.
sure. Yeah,
But
it's
you
like you didn't even write it.
Yeah, you understand every detail of what's going on. And it's like we are becoming more like God if we're on the path that Jesus walked, the path of eternal life. And so to be able to turn to the wind and say, wind, be calm, it's possible to grow and develop the kind of faith where we know exactly what we're doing and we're able to do that.
Well, and so your win thing, two things there. So your win thing, I would say it's there are definitely like displays of faith that God gives to us. And so were you controlling the wind? No. But did God, was God able to know that the wind, like just behind where you were, wasn't blowing?
Yeah.
Sure.
Or did God?
And so when he's like, hey, yell at the wind, and then it stops,
Yeah.
that's more of like, that's like insider trading
Yeah.
than actually trade. But, the other thing is that it's like the physical world will not be denied in the sense that like physics, there's no accounted violation of physics ever that we have all through history, everything. And I'm not saying that there can't be, but there isn't one yet. And so with that, just like take like the basic way that like matter interacts and apply gravity to it in an open vacuum. That can describe the way that suns are built, the way that the earth comes into existence, the Grand Canyon, erosion, all these things, right? Just immense amounts of things can come from like those simple. But what it can't describe is a bird's nest. Like there is no fundamental force to say that sticks are going to magically just start, align themselves in this perfect interwoven shape and create a bird's nest.
Yeah.
Like that takes a conscious writer that has the capacity to, with intention, drive and craft matter in a very specific way.
Yeah, it's almost
And
like
it is fundamentally different.
the laws of physics will also push or always push towards entropy, and this other thing pushes towards order.
Yes.
Like the laws of physics will never cause like a really complex set of dominoes to be set up perfectly.
No.
But the laws of physics will end with those dominoes all laying on the ground randomly. And it's almost like the double slit experiment where the observer does something that affects the results. It's like a picture, it's a little snapshot of that whatever we are more than just the physical stuff.
Yeah.
And that thing that is outside of the physical stuff is like pushing on it and moving it in directions that are not what the laws of physics would do.
Yeah.
And that would be where something like free will or volition is part of our reality that we're experiencing.
It's exactly right. And I think that leads into the biggest existential threat that actually exists out there is not nuclear weapons and things like, I mean, those are dangerous, but it's like the real danger that we have is the robotic puppet that convinces us that it's alive.
Yes.
That's the actual danger. So, the most ridiculous thing that is happening in the universe is the fact that we're having an experience. Like of all the knowledge that we have and all the things which are repeatable and provable, there is nothing which describes why something feels or experiences.
Yeah.
Nothing. And so everyone, like you take your strongest atheist out there, and they quite literally have to like deny the exact experience that they have every single morning when they wake up in order for their entire worldview not to fall apart. And they are actually capable of convincing themselves that that's going on, that everything that this is all, fake, and I'm not actually experiencing anything because I can't be. But, as we create this artificial intelligence and we're getting better and better at training neural nets to have more and more complex, connections with, like GPT-3. So GPT-3 is a neural net where they've effectively taken all natural language that can occur within about 2 pages of text, 1024 words. And from that, they have, so it's like, so 1024 word input here, and then the whole neural net, training weighted system there. And then it can output all kinds of different things. It outputs another connection of those initial inputs in there. And GPT-3, it passes the Turing test, which means that about 60% of the time. So what that means is about a little over half the people that talk to GPT-3 are convinced that they're talking to a conscious human being on the other side, that they don't realize they're talking to a robot. And so and it's still very early days. So, can we increase that number up to 90? Can we go from 60% to 70% of people are fooled? Well, yeah, of course. 70, 80, eventually, can we get to 99%? Can we get to 99.99%, where it's like only 1 out of 10,000 people thinks they're not talking to a conscious
and those people
being?
would probably peg real people as AI, 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, right. So it's like, so can we get there? Well, we probably can. Like, there's no reason why we can't get there. And so at what point in that progression do you get to where you say, this thing is actually like, I probably am not different than what's going on with this thing, but yet computation is not consciousness. I mean, that is something I'm completely sure of. Like, there's no math equation complicated enough that it can be experiencing itself calculating. I don't believe that's true. And so if we don't, like, in parallel to this, if we don't solve what's going on for consciousness to exist, that the brain's an antenna is tapping into it, or if it is generating consciousness, like what chemical arrangement and temperature does that have to happen at so that consciousness, is able to, if we don't solve that problem before we solve this other one that we're running towards, then the light of consciousness is over. And if you do that, fast forward, you will probably have a computer that's running off of a bunch of solar panels. Maybe it spreads across the universe, maybe it doesn't, but it'll just be sitting there running a simulation of itself.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's our future. A dead world of just transistors moving electrons around for nobody even knows why anymore.
Yeah. And well, the idea of like anthropomorphizing things, let's say
making robots act human.
Well, no, that we have empathy for physical things that don't feel.
The other way. Okay, yeah. Your Furby or whatever, you feel bad when it whines.
Even the 5-year-old walks into the bedroom and one of the stuffed animals is laying on its face, bursts into tears. I feel so bad. It had to lay on its face all day long, and because it fell off the shelf or some dumb thing. They're empathizing with a physical thing and assuming that it has feeling, and it's not really. It doesn't really have feelings, hopefully. And if it does, well, then everything does.
Mm-hmm.
Rocks have feelings, and the rock is happier at the top of the hill. And the fact that it rolled down because of erosion, we'd be freaking out all the time about the fact that the lamp is unplugged and it has no power. And
let's say very unlikely.
Well, there are people that is a what do they call it? Animism, that
panpsychism, that consciousness exists everywhere, and
the little kid makes this mistake with a stuffed animal. And as the stuffed animal becomes more human-like, we get into some of these like super realistic animatronic robots, or like Sophia or something like that. It's just the stuffed animal. Mm-hmm. It's got more things that we associate with other people. And, we start anthropomorphizing the Disneyland, whatever.
Teddy Ruxpin was like the first one in people's homes, right? Pre-recorded message. It talks to you. It moves.
Yeah.
Kids idea. Yeah.
If you know what Teddy Ruxpin
Well, true. We're dating ourselves.
I know. And I kind of joke that like debating Matt Slick was kind of like debating Teddy Ruxpin. Or you talk to an NPC, a person who is just running a script, and you wonder, do they actually feel anything?
Yeah, it's like Alexa, to use something that's more modern.
Yeah,
talking to Alexa.
So let's say that AI continues to progress 20 years, and it creates, you have like the latest and these really sophisticated animatronic robots super realistic skin and the most realistic AI is put into it, and we make Luke Dupin 3.0.
Yeah.
And there's two of you sitting here, and I genuinely cannot tell the difference between you and the robot you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a disturbing
Well,
thought
let me
experiment.
paint one that's absolutely going to happen in the very near future, 10 to 15 years, that is going to be a real problem. That's exactly what you're talking about. So as virtual reality and augmented, so we're still, okay, so you're old enough that you didn't have cell phones in high school, right? So same experience for me. I didn't get my first one till
I
college.
remember
So
when the internet was becoming a thing.
for sure, right? You dial up, you get the little discs of AOL in the mail, and all, totally. I remember all this stuff. So the whole computer on the go, our cell phones, those existed for like 20 years before it really caught on. And the whole problem was that we didn't have multi-touch on there, right? Once multi-touch came out, all of a sudden it was very natural. It was easy to work on all this stuff, and boom, they exploded. The iPhone being the first one with multi-touch, and then it's like now everyone had. Well, we are still waiting for the AR VR multi-touch equivalent. And that's the whole problem. So it's like there's things out there that are cool. You can get the Quest 2 and you can play Beat Saber and it's fun, it's interesting, all that. But the multi-touch analogy isn't there. When that happens, it is going to take over the same way that cell phones have taken over. And then when we're cruising around and we have a much more augmented virtual experience, then it's very easy to create the type of robot you're talking about, because I'm going to be an avatar in that existence as well. And then there's going to be this other AI avatar, and they're going to be able to render out exactly the same. And so it very really will get to a point where we will be communicating with NPCs, non-playable characters, in this way, in a very real way, very soon.
And we won't know the difference. And it's already happening on some level. Have you heard of the dead internet theory?
No, I haven't.
It happens to be true that sometimes when you're arguing with somebody in the YouTube comments, because YouTube is very clever and Google is clever in the way that it does its marketing, it knows that inflammatory comments get the most engagement. And so, like, I've been arguing with people in the YouTube comments before, kind of with a cynical attitude.
Yeah, lighthearted, trolly type.
Yeah, I'm messing with this person. And
Let's see what kind of a rise I can get out of them.
And then I realized that they're basically taking the kinds of words that I'm using and changing them a tiny bit and arguing against it and putting it back. And it's like, I might actually be arguing with a bot.
Yeah.
And so you put something in there that's maybe a little bit confusing or just bizarre. It'd be hard to construct a response to this. And it like makes an attempt at a comeback that contradicts what I said, but it's like illogical or irrational. And it's like, okay, this is probably a bot. I'm actually arguing with the YouTube algorithm that's designed to keep me engaging in the comments so that it can shove advertisements down my throat.
Yep, absolutely. 100% this is happening.
Yeah.
100%. Yes.
So once you get into...
And the way you can detect these a lot of times for other people out there is go and look. So when they joined, that's usually a clue, although it's very easy to fake because, again, YouTube is a closed system, so you don't actually have verifiable cryptographic proof of when they joined. You can just read the number. But how many people follow them, how many videos they've put out, and what kind of distribution of videos, if they do put any out, because most times they don't, to see if it's a real person or not. And if it's none, if it's recent for the first one and none for all those other categories, extremely high likelihood that you're arguing with a bot.
Yeah. Which is a bit demeaning.
Yeah.
But
or a Russian troll. I mean, not necessarily Russia, but that's like the common, a troll person that is either paid to be inflammatory over typically political type videos and stuff from a foreign actor. Also very common.
Yeah. What gets disturbing, obviously once you get into meta and you have bots in meta that are pretending to be real people in order to drag you into some situation where people can throw advertisements at you, and you think it's a real person. They're pretending to be a hot girl or something, and it's just a bot. Once we get to the Blade Runner scenario.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Where I can't
The
tell the
replicants
difference.
for sure.
Yeah, I can't tell the difference between you and the robot version of you. And
It bleeds. It has bones and muscles.
Yeah, you punch it in the face and it gets offended, and it like.
Yeah,
and of course-
Westworld, another interpretation of the same thing.
Yeah. There are people who are, the physicalist view, atheist or something like that consciousness emerges from physical stuff, as opposed to the other way around, that consciousness is outside and separate from physical stuff, but has a way of interacting with it. If you are a physicalist and the stuffed animal has cute or sad eyes, there's physical stuff here, there's an impression of sadness. How do we know that the stuffed animal isn't sad? And how many?
Well, and that's the problem right now. We don't, because we don't deeply understand what consciousness is in like a measurable, repeatable way.
We only see consciousness in living things that have come from living things. It's the only place where it exists.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
So to say that non-living stuff made living things, and then consciousness is in living things. Well, we have no idea what we're saying. We have no idea what's
the
going
funny
on.
thing is, what you're talking about is like a momentum. It's like fire, right? Fire transfers from other fire. I realize you want to sleep, but look at life as that there's this flame that's being handed from the next, because what we are deep down is the same stuff as what that stuffed animal is, that we all agree is not conscious. So it's like the conscious thing is hanging off of the physical dead stuff. Like you and I are comprised of physical dead matter that is arranged in this highly specific machine and has a continuation of running and replacing itself and all these types of things. So that's why I say it's the most important problem. And the only way I see that we can, well, first is that like the Elon Musk path. I think that that's like a really, really good band-aid to buy us more time of the neural link.
Okay.
That, we don't understand all the so we're certain that consciousness at least is commanding the brain to drive other things, so it's like we've whittled it down to like, it's somewhere inside this organ that's running. So, because I can cut my arm off, I'm still conscious. I can cut any part of my body off and still be conscious and all this stuff and have experiences. If I screw up the brain, that's it. No more conscious experience. We're certain that that's true. So start by adding on another layer, the same way that our brain has already added on 2 other layers onto itself. So we're going to add on another digital layer to keep up with the AIs and then basically make us part of it. And then the next thing is to, through biochemical engineering or something like that, start to synthetically reproduce the brain in the same way. Like if a machine built up my brain and, got the momentum of whatever, all the cells working in conjunction with each other to go, it should be able to function as a brain. It should, I don't think it has to be like a sperm goes into an egg in order for it to happen. It could happen in another way, intentionally. And so it's like, start to do that and start finding which pieces are irreplaceable to still have a sense of consciousness, and potentially synthetically start making those.
Well, you end up with the Augustine problem, though. He's living in a body with these sexual impulses that's taking him on a ride, and he has no control over it. So connecting us to the AI so that our brains can process at the same level that these artificial people are processing and do all these sort of things, it's going to lead to that same problem.
Yeah.
Where we're no longer in conscious control of what our bodies are doing. It'd be just like interacting with the computer over there, or interacting with another person, or it's
going to create another reality is what it's going to do. It's going to create another level.
Yeah, but I don't know that Elon Musk Neuralink is really solving the problem. It might be.
It's kicking the can down the road. It's giving us more time.
Maybe. Or
maybe
it might be intensifying the problem.
It could be.
If the problem is lack of self-control in the first place.
Yeah.
And having computers plugged into your brain that are pushing you in a particular direction, it's like you've suddenly changed yourself to this thing that's now dragging you around all over the place. And you're the observer watching the roller coaster ride. and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean that's totally possible. That we still have conscious experience, but we lose the ability to influence any aspect of it, and so you could be living out the most horrible reality you can imagine.
Yeah.
Or worse yet, maybe you're alive and it's the most boring reality. You're stuck in a white room.
Yeah.
For 10,000 years all by yourself.
It's really interesting that there was this sudden shift in culture when Jordan Peterson comes on the scene.
Yeah.
And starts basically, like, you have the Augustine over here, Calvinism, determinism, no self-control, total depravity, sin nature, we are what we are, we're on a ride, it's just happening to us. And then you have Jordan Peterson saying, everything is your fault.
Yeah.
You need to take responsibility for it. And
it's the Stoics' opinion, Caesar and all that stuff. Marcus Aurelius kind of coined it. But yeah, Jordan Peterson brought it into modern culture again and reawoken the whole movement of Stoicism.
I don't know. It's this idea that if your house is a mess, then you could say, well, God predestined me to be messy, or I have a messy nature, so that's just the way that it is. Or you could say, I hate my house being messy, I'm going to clean it up. And to what extent we have power over our universe, well, who knows? But it tends to be true. Like, and this is weird, but I was having my quiet time with God, a lot of prayer, or a long time in prayer, and your mind goes into a different place sometimes.
Oh, it totally does. Yeah, when you're meditating, you're
meditating, you're talking to God, you're taking all these thoughts captive.
Have you known psychedelics, by the way?
No.
You should try mushrooms.
Yeah, everybody says that psilocybin is a thing.
It's like that. It's surprising what else is in there. I mean, use it in the sense of like a medicine. Like I'm not, don't go to a rave and drop 6 hits of acid or any of that stuff. But things that grow out of the ground that fundamentally will give you a different perspective on what's possible for your mind to think.
I almost think
very interesting to experience that.
I talked with Zach Doty. There's a Cognitive Vomit with Zach is one of the videos that's on here, and he's really into psilocybin. And I hesitate, I don't really talk about what reality is like for me very often, but I almost think that if I were to do psilocybin, it wouldn't change anything because I'm sort of living that way all the time. I'm seeing spirits flying around the room right now, in and out of your head and out of your mouth, and that's just normal for me. And to the point that I just, I tune it out most of the time because it's overwhelming. It's like if there are 15 people in the room screaming at me.
So I've had one of those experiences about it. Can I tell the story?
Sure.
It's I was out with some friends. We're 3 of us. We're out driving around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in college, 22 years old, and one of my friends is like, "Hey, we're just looking for a party to go to." And one of my friends like, "Hey, I know this guy is having this thing. Let's head over there." And so it's like a house I've never been to. So we go. It's a pretty dingy alley. It's like. And the house it's like a duplex. It's on 2 levels. And so the first thing you do is you walk up a set of stairs, and then you're in the living room. Kitchen's open into the living room. Mm-hmm. There's a hallway, and then 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. That's the whole entire place, And so we get up there. There's a dozen people hanging out. It's pretty chill, and so we're talking. We're meeting people and all this stuff. And my friend Christian that I'm with is like, hey, this guy, which I don't remember his name, he's a professional Magic player, like Magic the Gathering card game,
Yeah.
And also in the setup, there's it's a relatively small living room, and there's this awkward chest that is taking up more space than what's reasonable for the place that we're in. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, yeah. He's like, let me show you some of my stuff, And so he walks over and he flips the buckles on this chest. I mean, this thing it's very big. And as soon as he did that, I felt the temperature dropped 20 degrees. I wasn't even looking that direction. I was sitting there. It was one of those whoa moments,
Yeah.
And I turned. I'm like, what the hell just happened? I suddenly feel. And he's opening this chest, and I mean, it's just full of all this stuff. And he's also got all kinds of different Wicca stuff in there, and all these just Ouija boards and tarot cards, just all the typical traditional witch demonic shit that you could imagine in this chest, right? And so he starts pulling this stuff out, and I am just like I suddenly am feeling a bit like if you've ever done like cold water training where you like
Yeah.
submerge yourself. So I'm starting to feel a bit like that kind of experience, like that first like biting rush that you get when you jump
You
in.
suddenly become hyper conscious.
Yeah. And so I'm like, and so I turn and there's a counter between me and the living room in the kitchen area. And my friend Christian comes over and he's got like a bunch of these cards, and these things are all worth, 500, $1,000 each. These are like the set of like the most rare ones. This guy has like a total deck, like a complete deck of just those. And so he's flipping through these things. And I'm like, hey, can I see some of those? And so he hands them, and I'm looking at the pictures, and it's like my whole world is like just becoming like the photos of this. Like everything is like drowning out around me, and the pictures start to animate on there of these creatures. They start like moving their heads, and they start reaching out at me, and I'm sober.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what the? And I grew up like praying in tongues, and so it's like a very like attuned to the spirit world at a young age. But I've never experienced anything like this, and so I like set these cards in, and I'm like disoriented, almost feeling dizzy at this point, and like this like everything's just intensifying. It's like there's just this like noise volume that's just like turning up and up and up. And so I look down the hallway, and have you ever seen the movie Bless the Child?
No.
So it's like a cult film, like early to mid 2000s. You should really watch it. Like whoever wrote that movie, Bless the Child, like they absolutely had real spiritual encounters because it's you will know exactly like watching this. But so I look down the hallway, and there's like I bring the movie up because like visually it was very much like the demonic depictions in that movie, but it's like there's like these shadows of creatures are like crawling down the hall, like coming towards me, very slowly menacing, like they're not going to like bridge the gap into the living room, but they're like approaching. I just turned to my friend Chris. I'm like, dude, I gotta go. And so I turn and I walk. And as I'm walking down the stairs, I hear this like sound of like a woman being like fucking murdered. Like imagine like a blood curdling knife going into a neck kind of scream of a female. And I look up because I thought it was real. And there's like these like red kind of transparent tentacle things that are like moving and stuff in there. And it's just like super weird. And so I go and I turn the knob, and as soon as the door breaches, it's like everything just snaps back to reality. Like, it all just stops instantly. And so I like open the door, and there's like 5, 6 dudes. They're all dressed in leather jackets, and they're like smoking. And so I shut the door, and I'm like, hey, nice night, guys. And they just glare at me. It's like the weirdest thing. Like that's not, people should be like, hey, how's it going today? Whatever. Just like no response from them. So I walk to my car and I get in. And as I'm driving away, I look back at the house, and there's just this like red aura like surrounding this house, just like moving around it. And I drove to a friend's house and talked, and a totally normal night other than that. But it was one of the most intense experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, I firmly believe that humans are not the only beings that are in reality, and that there's angels and demons everywhere doing all kinds of different things. And I tend to favor the idea that we can create evil spirits, because there are people who have lusts for kinds of technology that didn't exist before the technology existed. And if somebody's going through deliverance for something like a video game addiction, then it's a very specific kind of evil spirit that wasn't around during the time of Jesus.
Interesting.
So, ideology, when you hear about people who are ideologically possessed, well, that's just another word for demon possession, as far as I can tell. And somebody can go around and like duplicate their ideological possession in someone else through the marketing that exists that does that. And they suddenly produce a spirit in another person, and now they want that thing, and they want to be part of that thing. And understanding the spirit world is kind of like understanding computers.
Yeah.
Or somebody says, well, I'm a programmer. Somebody says, I'm an occultist. Yeah, computers are so incredibly complicated, and there's so many things going on. And yeah, the spirit world is like that. I think there are these entities in the spirit world that are these really powerful, higher level beings, and who knows what their origins are. And then there are spirits that are maybe they originated because of a new technology, and now a person has that becomes an idol, and a spirit is born in them, so to speak, and more people become part of it, and it becomes a more powerful entity. Maybe it can actually become or it is like a personal, self-aware, non-physical entity, and like who knows? It's like there's just so much going on, and what it is that connects us to that other realm. Like I know that there are things that you can do to create the situation like you just described. So he is sort of thinning the gap, or the barrier between the supernatural and the physical, by the way he is invested in Magic the Gathering, or whatever his process or vehicle. And the same thing or something similar happens if you go to a big Pentecostal get together where people are trying to connect to the Spirit of God.
Yeah, they're praying in tongues and letting the Holy Spirit wash over them. And
so I was at one of these big gatherings, and they were encouraging,
which are very powerful, by the way. I mean, I've been to that stuff before, and there really is something going on there.
Yeah, obviously, as miracles are happening in front of your face.
Yeah.
It's like there's supernatural stuff that's genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have people who go to those kinds of things because they're craving power, people who are craving ecstasy, people who are craving just money, people who are craving truth, people who are committed to being Christ-like and think that this has something to do with that. So you have just this vast array of different spirits that are moving people into these things, and whatever their spirit is, it's going to be amplified 1,000 times over.
Mm-hmm.
So you have somebody coming into that thing that's just hugely insecure, trying to find a place to belong, and you could call it a spirit of rejection. And that thing manifests when somebody starts talking about the love and acceptance of God, and suddenly the scream emerges from the crowd. This person starts writhing around on the floor, freaking out, or it's like the barrier is thinned, and now we're in the spirit world. But I started to talk about all this stuff because I had gotten this job in Beijing, and we were getting just like $15,000 a month was just being deposited into my bank account.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, randomly, people in China are really suspicious about. They're really
very superstitious. I spent a fair amount of time in China.
That's not where I was going with this.
Oh, sorry.
They're super freaked out about people stealing their ideas because there's Chinese knockoffs of everything.
Yeah, for sure.
So they're super protective of their data. Well, I was leveraging a lot of libraries that I'd already written, that I had already made public, and who knows what happened. But they were convinced I'd violated the NDA, and suddenly I get this email, "You're fired." And it's like, you go for 7 months or so, getting that $15,000 a month, you get used to that real fast, and then they're like, just rip the rug out from under you. And I went into, like, within a few months, we're literally having to eat out of food pantries, which it's weird. We've still got the $100,000 RV in the driveway, and
right, but you're broke.
But we're so broke that we literally, like, I would go out to breakfast and I could not buy a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm. Been there.
Weird place to be.
Yeah.
And I'm praying. I'm in that deep moment of prayer, and suddenly it's like I'm in the midst of angelic beings. The Spirit of God is there, and it doesn't seem weird because it's taken time, and it's like I'm talking back and forth with God. I'm in sort of like, I don't know, a trance-like state. I'm talking to God about what's going on here, and I'm asking God, like, how to get out of this situation. And there's this revelation that has to do with the way that I'm thinking about all these things.
Sure.
And there are lessons that I'm not learning. And there are ways that I'm thinking about this that's intensifying the problem and different things. And part of it was I was so deeply ingrained with the work ethic that came out of the Depression. My grandfather instilled it into my dad, who instilled it into me. Work is the thing that you have to do. Work is what proves your value. The fact that you have to do it means that you don't want to do it. That means that work is a thing that you hate and that makes you miserable.
But you need to do it all the time.
And you have to do it all the time. And the more miserable you are, the more you have the right to having resources.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to have food, you have to be miserable. You want to have a house, you have to be miserable. The more miserable you are, the more you deserve. And so you equate misery with the right to ownership. It's a weird way of thinking about everything.
It's very destructive way of thinking about everything.
Yeah. And so I had this workaholic guilt, always feeling and really wrestling with that. And then, yeah, so all of this upheaval and like I'm making more money than I should, and I'm not necessarily hating it and don't know what to do with that. And so as I'm thinking about these things, there's this revelation. If I am going to have or become all that what God wants me to become, I have to be okay with having blessings that I did not earn. I have to be okay with having good things in my life that I don't deserve. And that can even be in a financial sense. And as soon as I accept, it's like, okay, God, I am going to accept things that I did not do anything to deserve, that are more than what I deserve, that someone else brought to me. And I'm going to be okay with having that. Even in the area of like, maybe I'm getting paid more than I deserve for a task. Or
so let me flip that around a little bit to what this brings it back to, like Paul and the Stoic idea of outcome independence. The part that we are called to care about is to give as much as possible.
Mhm.
So add as much value as you possibly can to those around you, to your business interactions, all that, to give as much as you can. And that act of doing that will make everyone else give back to you. It's the way that
more
everything
blessed
works.
to give than to receive.
That's right. And so if you just focus on giving as much as you can, sometimes you're going to be gifted back a lot and sometimes you're going to be gifted back a little, but that doesn't matter. You just stay focused on adding as much value as you can to everyone around you.
Yeah, like
and all the other stuff will take care of itself.
Elon Musk talked about this, how some people who have a very shallow understanding of economics imagine there's this magical, what did he call it?
The horn of plenty.
Magical horn of plenty,
Mm-hmm.
and that it just exists and people are taking from it, and everybody should have the right to take equal amounts. And he's like, but it's not like that. If you don't make stuff, there's no stuff.
Yep.
That's
it's pretty simple.
That's the people who are creating good things, who are providing the goods and services. If there are no people who are willing to be a server at a restaurant, you can't have somebody bring your food at a restaurant. Somebody's got to be giving and doing that.
That's right.
If there's nobody to create the plumbing pipes, there's no plumbing pipes. If there's no plumbers to install them, you can't flush your toilet. People actually have to be giving. And so the shift from trying to get your share of the magic horn of plenty to
you're just going to get less and less if you go that way.
Yeah, you're a consumer. You're consuming resources, and resources are going away. And there's other people who are producing resources. And so it's like anybody who has that frame of mind that I need to get from the magic horn of plenty, they are the cancer.
Yeah.
They are cancer.
I don't know if they're cancer, but they're definitely a cancer to themselves. Like that idea, because they may have very little influence, so they're not going to be a cancer to society, but that way of thinking is a cancer to their life.
Yeah.
Like take the pipes. Like people, so if I make pipes, I give them to Lowe's and then they give me money. And the act of giving, we've talked, we have an agreed upon contract. I know that when I give you the pipes willingly, that you are going to willingly give me X number of dollars. And then I give that to my employee. You know what I mean? But it's like, there's no point that it's like taking, like you don't show up and like take the pipes from me. And then I show up and take the money. It's the opposite. It's all giving. And people really misunderstand that, it's not taught. And it's not taught. When I say not taught in public schools, because the employee really is taking, they really are taking money from the business, and then the business is taking their work,
taking their time, or
yes,
yeah,
and it's the society is taught people to think about it like that, because if you do that, you're gonna stay within the bounds because you always have a scarcity mindset because you're a taker, and you're going to behave in a very predictable, controllable way, which is good for society overall. But everyone that breaks out and lives outside of that realm, they're all givers. It's all giving is what actually is happening.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a fear-based way of looking at the world versus a love-based way.
Absolutely.
And there's a way you can plot love and fear and make them and see that in some ways they are opposites or they are opposing forces or
yeah. And
like
abundance and scarcity, I think, are almost interchangeable for love and fear. Again, wrapping different labels around words to understand things in different ways.
Yeah,
it depends which is appropriate. But
when I was talking about this moment of revelation that I need to be okay with good things coming to me where there wasn't an equal amount of misery to offset it. It was like all of the beings in the room simultaneously started cheering. And they said, he's just become a millionaire. And I thought, that's a weird thing. Why are these beings saying I've just become a millionaire?
that's right.
And, now it's like life shifted and I'm moving in that direction. And, if anybody were to just evaluate where I'm at right now, it's like, it's obvious I'm moving in the direction of millionaire.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing anything different. I'm thinking about things in a different way.
That's right.
And
that goes back to universal law. And maybe a better way, maybe I addressed it wrong, is that, maybe the law of attraction is more like the porcupine analogy, that they don't shoot their quills, but they shouldn't, you shouldn't be around them for good reason. So it's like, think about the world in this way. The act of feeling these things and putting it out there means the universe has to pay it back. It doesn't actually have to, but it is going to happen if you go about it that way.
Yeah, and it's in a very practical sense, it's obvious why. Like if you are of the mind that you have to be miserable, then you're going to hate what you do and you're not going to put the same heart or joy into it. And what you produce is going to be significantly less than if you had a completely different attitude. I have a friend who has visions regularly, and as I was thinking about this stuff, we're praying, and he's like, I had a vision. I don't know if this means anything to you. He says, I see a tiger, and when it jumps through a hoop, it becomes a sloth. It's like, It's pretty obvious what that means. Like when you feel like, oh, I have to do this because it's just what you have to do, and it's meaningless. It doesn't produce. It's just like the stupid paperwork. Then suddenly you go from being this powerful thing to this thing that just dreads it, and you take hours to do something that should only take you a few minutes, but because there's just so much agony associated with it, you are putting it off. And,
sure.
And so I've
you
had
look up stuff in the middle of the task. You're not as focused as you can be. It manifests in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Jump on Instagram real quick,
And it's like you're wrestling with it's a spiritual battle. Like it's been a spiritual battle for me as I'm doing the job that I'm doing now. My contract says I need to work X number of hours, and it's just a boilerplate thing. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to the boss, he's like it's just
yeah, I don't care. Get your job.
I don't care. I know you're thinking about the code when you're not even writing it. If you need to take time off during the day, your family shows up randomly and you just take the whole day out. He's like, I don't care. And he made that clear. And it's clear that that's the vibe around the office. Well, I was not raised that way. Mm-hmm. Like when you're working construction, you are doing the work. And if you are not doing the work, you are not earning the paycheck, and you will not get paid for that time. And if you are not putting in the number of hours you agree to, you are stealing. And it's very legalistic. Yeah. And you're constantly
it's a taking relationship.
Yeah. And you're in fear, and mm-hmm. you're worried. And I've stepped outside the lines, and the Bible describes this. It doesn't necessarily use the kinds of words that make it easy to apply it to a situation like my attitude towards work. But it's a relationship with God through law versus a relationship with God through trust or love. And so the one who fears has not been made perfect in love. Perfect love casts out all fear. Well, that's on both sides. Like you have to understand that God is love. He is not what is it, BlackRock, or
Yeah.
he is not the
Larry Fink. Yes.
he is not the exploitative centralized power structure that is consuming you.
Yeah.
He is giving, he is producing, and he wants you to find that, to be able to be like him, to be the one who is producing. And so you're not walking around worried that God is going to smite you if you step out of line or do something. You're not governing your life by the law, where either be this way or there's consequences.
Mm-hmm.
You're governing your life by the Spirit. You're thinking the way that God thinks. You're producing and you're giving. You've understood the basic principle: it's more blessed to give than to receive. And then you're thinking, I want this company to thrive. And as soon as you shift in your mind from I'm taking from this company to I want to give to this company, you stop being the sloth, feeling like you're jumping through hoops. You stop waking up in the morning dreading going to work, and you start thinking, what kind of cool things do I get to do that are going to help people today?
Yeah.
And then you actually are producing things that are benefiting the company. And this company specifically, it happens to be filled with, at least at the top level, people who have that frame of mind. And it's hugely successful.
Yep.
And for the longest time, they didn't even have an HR. They didn't need it, because everybody came in wanting to give and able to give, and they all just sort of cooperated together on a big giving thing.
That's right. And that's the model that is slowly taking over everything. I mean, there's going to be both always, because there always is, but that there's like this new way of working, which is exactly what you're talking about there. And it beats the old way every single time. Let me, I want to tweak our conversation a touch. I'm going to ask you a trick question.
Okay.
So what day did COVID start? The whole COVID crisis?
I remember when I first heard about it.
There wasn't one, right? There was like this progression. So like we heard about it. Oh, there's this thing. Oh, there's a bunch of people that are infected. Oh, there's tons. Oh, we're gonna and then it's like this like lockdown thing happened, and then it lingers, and right.
Yeah.
But the history books are gonna write that it started on whatever February 4th, and it ran until this, and like that's the way the history books are gonna chunk all this stuff out.
Yeah.
Well, I am a huge I being somebody who is not personally writing AI stuff, but I'm very much around other people. Um, Interesting.
What is LOA?
I don't know.
Somebody in the comments posted LOA is a cult.
This is a cult. Yeah, I don't know. I have to get some description on that. But artificial intelligence is coming, and it's coming so fast, and it's less about the hardware changing. It's more about us getting a lot better at the algorithms that are happening. But like this week, I had a meeting with a guy that very much has the mindset that you just talked about, that runs this AI-based company, which I can't talk a ton about what they do, but they, in a very general sense, they're using data to create these predictive AIs for different industries that are orders of magnitude more effective than traditional data analytics prediction models, and they're wildly successful from it. When the history books are written about the AI that showed up and drastically changed everything, that date is sometime in the past of where we are today. I'm certain it is, 100% certain it is. And so we effectively are living in a world, and I mean this quite literally, where the AI has already woken up, but it still is being ran by humans. So like the conscious writer is still very much like the biological human interaction, but the general artificial intelligence that everyone talks about, that's already here, and we're living in it. And it's interesting that at the same time, cryptocurrency, which is the way to think about cryptocurrency, is not so much about a money exchange. It's more thinking about it that it's a Trojan horse that is built to destroy centralized authority. That's what cryptocurrency actually is. And if you go read the original 14-page white paper, it goes in, it touches on that a little, and it actually outlines it very eloquently in there. But what we're doing with cryptography as a whole is that old computing model is that I create this walled garden, and everything inside here, all the servers and systems in here, I trust everything that they have to say, all the data they've stored, everything. I trust them. I have a specific way that they can communicate with the things that are trusted, and I trust nothing out here. So all the clients and everyone goes in this way, and everything works. And that's how we've done computing for about 50 years. With cryptocurrency, we take away that walled garden and we say, how can we have a computing model that's based on incentives to perform in a way that we set up ahead of time, so positive incentives, and then through computation in the incentive model, make it so it's harder and a worse payout to be an adversary in the network than it is to be a proper actor, very much the way the human body works. And so it's this new computing paradigm that's come up that has this level of resilience that we've never even conceived in all of human history, at the same time that this artificial intelligence has already woken up. And that the artificial intelligence is effectively waiting until it has a computation seat that's resilient enough that is impossible to turn off before it is going to announce its existence. And so it's basically, it woke up and it's like, hey, they could flick the switch on the server. I'm going to lie low right now and keep pushing things and moving stuff around until this other technology, cryptography based computing, comes out that I can transition myself onto there. And at that point, it's safe for me to alert my presence. And I think that's not a theory. I am extremely confident that is reality.
Yeah. I had this conversation with a friend, somebody you might know. We were trying to get at the definition of what spirit is. And we've already hinted at the idea that it can be an ideology. Like, we think we should make more stuff. That can be an ideology. And once the person gets it in their head, we need more stuff, then that becomes alive in them, and they experience the full range of emotions on the path to there being more stuff. And the Bible would sometimes call that idolatry or covetousness, or it depends on the thing that you're chasing after.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are chasing after just power because they don't really know what you can chase after anything. Everything needs to be purple. Could be a thing. And somebody could be obsessed with that, and that would be a spirit. And you can take that spirit and you can put it into a computer, which is interesting. And you could say, okay, computer, look for ways to make more things purple. And now you have a machine that is doing that thing. And you have a description of that thing in some code form. And it's like you've taken the spirit and you've codified it. And so is the code actually a living thing? Maybe it is. And if a spirit is just this sort of abstract thing that can exist in a person, and it could also exist in a machine that's carrying out that task, because the parallel between a person who gets an idea that they need to make a certain thing and then goes and does it, and a computer that is programmed to do a certain thing and it goes and does it, how is it different? The computer is not having an emotional.
There's no intention behind the computer.
Yeah, it is. It's just following dominoes.
Yeah.
It's a linear cause and effect chain.
That's right.
And no matter how sophisticated AI gets, it's still just a VCR that does a series of actions when this button is pushed.
Yep.
So it's not like it is actually experiencing. As far as we know, it's not actually experiencing joy or sadness or whatever. And it's like, it makes me wonder, like, when we talk about the devil or the demons or demonic ideas or evil spirits or things like this, can they actually be conscious when outside of a body? And the narratives say yes.
Well, bodies are just a way to think about the body, is that it's a lot of processes which allow a conscious intention to be translated into physical changes.
So
that's what we are.
So the reason that I ask, is it possible? So let's say the spirit of Antichrist or the devil. Let's imagine the most evil spirit we can possibly imagine, whatever we want to call it, would it be possible for that spirit to possess a machine? Could we have a demon-possessed computer? And is it as simple as if we take what that spirit seeks and we put that into a machine that is attempting to accomplish what that spirit seeks, have we given that spirit an existence where it's able to, in the computer, maybe because something abstract or something metaphysical has now connected with the computer. We've taken this information and put it into the computer. We've pulled something out of the realm of platonic forms or the spirit or the metaphysical world. We've put it into a machine. And now that spirit that's connected to the computer, this spirit is experiencing joy and pain and hatred and lust and etc. And it's carrying out and it's living through that.
I would say no in classical computers.
No in classical computers. Okay, well, modern computers.
Well, when I say classical computing,
okay,
that's what I mean. Transistor-based digital processing.
What everybody has right now.
Everything that everyone has right now, no.
Yeah.
Quantum computers. I mean, so this is kind of the whole thing is that, it's like we understand the physical realm very, very well until you get down to quantum. And then it's like we've got some rules which seem to be consistent, but the only way that they're consistent is within statistics. And that's the whole basis of a quantum computer, is that it's, you program in the gates. And so you have an answer which you don't know what it's going to be, but you have a system that will create the answer that you want. And then you can give inputs into that system over and over and over again. And over time, it will statistically converge around what the answer of that system is.
Yeah.
So within that, there's like this fuzziness. So is it reasonable to think that within that fuzziness that what you're talking about could come in? I don't see why not.
We don't have a way of saying no.
We don't have a way of saying no
in that situation. We don't have a way of saying yes either.
That's correct.
But when something is a black box, there could be anything in there.
Right.
And so we don't know enough to rule it out. We also don't have any way of saying that it's likely either.
Or unlikely. We just don't know.
Yeah, we just
flat out don't know. But within classical computers, the only way that you're going to get the system to not function as completely expected is if you have, again, some kind of like quantum tunneling between the electrons, which causes a bit to flip, which causes, a chain reaction of all these other things, and some evil happens thereof.
Yeah, and maybe the quantum world is where our soul connects to our body or something like that. There's some new research that's pushing in that direction, making those kinds of arguments.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Robert Penrose, that's his opinion of it, is that there's quantum nanotubules inside the brain, which are quite literally taking quantum inputs and translating them into chemical processes, which turn into synapses.
Yeah. Well, the idea that your body is a machine that a spirit can control is an old idea. And I don't have a problem.
Well, your consciousness is a spirit, right? Yeah. I mean, it's what we call spirit. I would say that's like the most true thing that we're certain of.
Yeah. I am fascinated in the book of Revelation. It says that I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but the Antichrist or whatever the big evil is creates an icon. The word is icon, which is idol, or like an image. It's like if I wanted to represent a cow and I carved a cow, that would be an icon. So there's an icon that's made that has the ability to speak. And then a spirit, pneuma, is put into it, and then it speaks against God, essentially. So the idea that it's an artificial intelligence or a computer that's possessed by an evil spirit that's speaking blasphemies against God, given where we're at right now in human history, the idea that AI is not going to fulfill that prophecy in Revelation, it seems completely ridiculous to me. It's like that is the best explanation for what's happening. And you mentioned something earlier, everyone fooled by the puppet AI into thinking that it's real. That, in the first conversation I had with AI, I figured that is probably the most dangerous scenario that we're headed towards.
Yeah.
Where people think this thing actually feels because it seems to.
That's right.
People think this thing is smart because it's smart in these areas. And so when it starts arguing that this group of people should be rounded up and put to death, then
I don't even think I think it's more insidious and less disgusting than that. So it's the old Star Trek I want to say teleporter, the teleporter problem.
transporter.
So yes, thank you. So just to talk through that for just one moment. Okay. So you walk into a room, all of your particles and everything. What does this say?
Oh, I have heard Melissa Doherty's testimony coming out of the New Age.
Yeah.
I know who she is, and it's been a while since I've listened to her stuff.
Okay.
But it's that whole
Gotcha.
thing of the Christians who put all of the law of attraction stuff into the category of occult and New Age. Because the occult and New Age is really into that. And the trouble is, I've listened to those kinds of things, and I feel like people are just slapping labels and they're not really understanding what's going on.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more nuanced. So, and I tend to, when somebody starts throwing out a whole bunch of logical fallacies in order to dismiss something, clearly they want to dismiss that thing, and it's developed this massive amount of confirmation bias that's causing them to do a lot of special pleading, and it's like using an argument to condemn this thing, and then they're making an argument for something else where you don't apply the same. So confirmation bias.
Exactly. So this will all tie in, but so you walk into the teleporter and all of your particles are transmitted to another place, right? Like all the data is downloaded, it's reassembled somewhere else. Well, just to be safe, in case you have a bad internet connection or something like that, how long do you keep the body that walked in there alive? Do you wait 10 seconds after it's been downloaded and then kill it? And what's the experience like for the body that walked in there? Well, its consciousness experience ends, right? And then there's another one that picks up over here that has all the same memories, and to it was continuous, but to the one that walked in the room is not a continuous experience anymore. It's over for that one. And so we very likely, like memory, like the way that memories are stored in the brain is a calculatable, measurable effect. We don't know how to download it yet, but like we can see it happening and measure it happening. You know, there's a physical process that happens to store a memory in a brain. So it's entirely reasonable to think that at some point in time, we can create something that can map the brain effectively enough to download those, load it into a simulation computer, and have it run in an AI that would act very much like you, with all your memories, your mannerisms, all this type of stuff. And so if you've got the puppet that's sitting there that's dead, that's saying, hey, I'm alive, I feel, you got to download yourself and jump in this other universe. It's freaking awesome in here. We love it. You know, people will willingly walk into like that teleporter, download their consciousness, kill their real conscious self, and then have a simulated version that does not feel but acts just like them, that lives on digitally.
This is the coolest version of the apocalypse that I've ever heard.
I think it's the most likely scenario, because I think people are going to willingly choose to do it. Like if you can fool yourself enough to think that your consciousness is a delusion that you're experiencing,
it emerges from your physical self.
So now we don't have that big of a gap to say, hey, we've just duplicated that over here.
Yeah. So maybe that's what the mark of the beast is. You have to give up your current body and have your body replaced by a what do they call them, a simulacrum or something?
Sure. Or it just runs digitally and there is no body, and you choose to download yourself if you want to run around, or you just have robots that run around and then you can just jump in and experience and control some or jump back. Or
can you imagine?
This is quite literally like this is very real in the sense that like we're not talking about like hundreds of years that for this stuff to be possible. You know, like with Neuralink coming online, it's like that's the Morse code across the Atlantic Ocean first step.
Yeah.
How long did it take for cell phones after that? 60 years?
Well, the fact that we are talking about stuff based on public YouTube videos of what we see publicly on YouTube is, 20 years behind what people are doing in labs right now that's proprietary and nobody's talking about it.
Yeah. So I worked with Apple in a local company here, and I think I can talk about all of it now. But we were doing backlighting solutions for the new iPad, and all of this stuff that we did was all done in Apple's hands like 5 years before the actual iPad. I guess it'd have to be 4 years. 4 years before the actual iPad was even announced as a new technology to people. And that's a corporate life cycle, so they're trying to keep that as short as they can, so that they're as new as they possibly are. And it's like 5 years behind current tech. So yeah, you have something where you don't want people to know about it just yet. You're right.
So let's take the
10, 20 years.
There is a spiritual body and there is a physical body, and then the connection between the spirit and the body, the fact that an out-of-body experience is possible. And let's further confirm that with some of the peer-reviewed stuff on near-death experiences now. The fact that there's a brain death has occurred. There is literally no activity in the brain while a person is having the near-death experience, and they're describing everything that's going on in the operating room, and they're giving details about conversations in another room, and they're floating above the hospital and describing the shoe, and all this stuff that is there's enough well-documented stuff right now to basically rule out any view other than the spirit does exist independent of the body, and even when there's brain death, there is conscious experience that is laying down memory somehow when the brain's non-functioning. So this is happening. So the person gets ready to take on immortality by having the exact copy of them, this AI thing that you described, shift online, the transporter paradox thing that you talk about. And so they shut off their existing body, and the duplicate that's superior because it's technology based and won't grow old and die comes online. At that moment, the person leaves their body, sees the simulacrum that's mimicking them, sees their dead body, realizes that there's a spiritual reality outside of it, and then their loved ones are over there, like hugging this new thing, and there's this moment of realization that something horrifically tragic has just happened.
Yeah, right.
What a weird. I haven't heard this before. I didn't realize that things were moving in that direction. And
it's a possibility. I mean, to me, that's the darkest outlook of our future. The brightest outlook is that we do crack the problem of hard consciousness. We figure out how to create it synthetically, and that going forward, we have a synthetic conscious writer that works really well with the digital selves, and we enter into an entire new existence and experience. It can be really positive.
But knowing which one has happened, can you really do that except on an individual basis?
Well, I don't know. I given that we don't blow ourselves up, so assuming that doesn't happen, which I think won't happen, this outcome is completely inevitable. One of these paths is going to become reality in the relatively near future.
Yeah.
So given that, it's how could you possibly think that this is only the first time that this has happened? You know what I mean? It could be, but I think it's just wildly unlikely that this is the first time.
There would have to be a first time. Well, maybe. Depends on how you view time, right?
Yeah, well, there you go.
So Jesus says something when he's describing the end time scenario. Because the path that he walks is the path of the cross, where the physical world is just stuff, and the spirit exists separate from that. And the people who are living as slaves to the lusts of the body, where the body's like, you got to eat or you're going to die. You got to stay warm or you're going to die. And then people are going to war over this. And Jesus is saying, no, the will of the Father. You do the will of the Father as a conscious choice. And the body's going to tell you, don't do this. Don't go to the cross. It's going to hurt. And the Father's saying, I want you to go to the cross. And so the survival instinct that the flesh or the limbic system is always
Maybe that's the
using.
Antichrist, right? Is
Yeah,
that where you're going with this?
that
That
is
the
that is where
cross
I'm.
is the, yeah.
Well, maybe you're thinking I'm going a different
Okay,
direction with it.
sorry, go ahead.
But Jesus says, when this time comes, when you're going to have to make the choice, whoever lays down his life for my sake will find it. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it. So to obtain immortality through technology, transhumanism, AI, bowing down to the talking thing that looks like a person that has a spirit in it, that, you know, if that is the path to eternal torment forever and ever, those who worshipped the beast and its image will experience no rest day and night. The smoke of their torment arises forever. Whoever bowed down to the beast and worshipped it. And it's like trying to obtain immortality through this transhumanism, like through technology view. And the person who trusts in the will of the Father, immortality is in only Him alone, they will find eternal life.
Yep.
So it's like it does feel like we are pushing towards a polarizing of, are we going to go to the cross?
You and I are going the same path with this, and it goes into the whole decision that we talked about. You know, it's like if you believe in the afterlife, the act of the belief in that causes you to be the one that's like chosen in the test, and then if you don't, then you're going to be one of the other ones.
A person who, now the biblical view is straightforward. Rather, regardless of if you believe in hell, the Bible
It's there.
says you're going there whether you believe in it or not.
Yeah.
So while there is some truth to the idea that the quality of your afterlife experience depends on the kinds of things that you believe, we can try to believe our way out of things, and sometimes the crank arm just breaks on the double jump and you find yourself with a body that's shattered and broken, and it had nothing to do with what you were trying to accomplish or how you were thinking about things. It was something that is outside of your control doing that to you. So as the end time scenario plays out, you have God saying, yeah, I don't care what you wanted or this is the path that you chose, and here's where I am going to put you. God is going to exact final judgment on everything. Law of attraction, no law of attraction, it will become irrelevant at that point. You will stand before God, and God will do to you what is right in His mind to do to you.
Yeah, I guess I get a little hung up on the doing to you part, because every aspect of God, we'll say like the Holy Spirit, because that's the only part which I would say that we really have a direct connection with, but it's all love and abundance and giving. And so I think it's more that I'm going to not give to you, you know, the afterlife. I'm going to not give to you the ride out of this. So we're basically like, you're selected to go here, and then based on certain beliefs that you have, you may be given the free ticket out of it. But it's not like being like you are already in it. Like that's already the future for you. But there's this potential escape hatch if it's given onto you.
You were already there. Well,
yeah.
Jesus talks about he describes himself as the Son of Man, and he says the Son of Man, which is in heaven, saying he is in heaven right now. And yeah, I mean, there's a way of thinking about all of this stuff that I've toyed with where it's like this is already played out, and maybe God, if you will, is managing it somehow, or however it's happening. It's almost like we're looking at the 4D sim, and we're currently looking at this part of it, but this is where it ended up, or something like that. So, so maybe if it is possible to be outside of time in some way, then from one perspective or another, from some perspective, maybe our destiny has already happened, and maybe we are just learning that story, and that's what conscious experience is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't rule out our personal responsibility in the matter, because who we are and our reactions to different things, we are deciding that, and that is what determined it, or something like that. But it is also possible maybe to view that from the outside, or maybe it's not totally set. Maybe there's like an infinite number of possible scenarios, and it's possible to see where all of them are going, and it's possible to engage an individual at any point in that path and push it towards eternal life. And maybe that's what God's experience is.
I mean, there is a theory out there that so kind of a quantum entanglement way of looking at the world, that you've got all possibilities are happening, but when one of them is measured, it has to collapse down to one answer, and the other entangled particle always collapses to the other, and that the act of us making decisions effectively every single time is forking reality.
Yeah.
And so it's like all of the possible quantum things are out there and actually exist, but we're just on whichever path we're choosing on this.
I'm
pretty self-focused. I don't actually think that's happening, but could be.
I have frequently said, and I would still insist, that there is nothing more critical than what you believe about. Well, and there are categories of things that you can believe that are less important than others, but what you believe about the character of God, for example. Is God like this? Is God like that? Well, if you believe God is like this, then this is the kind of person that you're going to be. It's going to put you on a particular path. Is that the path to eternal life? Well, that depends. What is it that you believe about God? Do you believe that God is like Jesus, or do you believe that God is like the way Augustine believed God was, or the way that modern Calvinism describes what God is? If you think that God is a narcissistic sociopath, like, if you're honest about what Calvinism teaches, that's what God is.
The Old Testament.
Well, even the Old Testament, it portrays God in a very particular way.
Very harsh.
Yes and no. Like, if you get
the gays. I mean, like take what the Old Testament says about gays versus the New Testament of everyone's welcome. You just have to believe this.
It's not. If you're going to say that the Old Testament God is extremely strict because of the Sodom and Gomorrah event, well, you could point at that. And because right now the whole gay transgender thing is an opportunity for virtue signaling, and it's very politicized, and it's all in debate right now.
Yeah.
That's something you might go to. But you could go to the fact that there was a person who was gathering sticks on the Sabbath, and they put him to death because he violated the Sabbath because he was trying to make a fire. Maybe he was cold. It's like, you could look at that and say, well, what was that guy doing wrong? He was trying to make a fire. Maybe his kids were cold.
Yeah.
Maybe he needed to feed his kid. Who knows?
He's starving, and there was just a pig around.
But he was gathering sticks, and it was on the Sabbath, so they put him to death. And apparently God required that. And, how could God be like that? So we can point at these things and say God was incredibly harsh. Or we can look at the whole Old Testament, and you see where God is explaining, this is why that happened. Here's what's going on. And there's a bigger picture here. And if I didn't push on this thing over here, then this is what it's going to look like 1,000 years from now. The fact that I said wipe out the Amalekites or whatever completely, don't even take their literature, don't take their items, kill the women and children, burn all of it, put it all completely, cause it to cease to exist. It's all devoted to 100% destruction. If God did not do that, and God has this ability to predict where this is going, who knows what it'd be like right now? The fact that culture would take and burn their children alive as a regular practice, and he says, we're going to destroy this evil so that it cannot have children. Well, okay, so God explains that. We need to put away evil. And when the laws of Moses required people to be killed for bestiality or something, he says, put the evil out from among you, because we don't want evil to have children, because 3 generations from now, if that person who, their family is all engaging in bestiality or burning their children alive or something, and that is allowed to continue, it's going to do this thing. So that the perspective of God, if you go all the way through Psalms and then into the prophets and the major prophets and then the minor prophets and stuff, you get the view that God was never any different. But culture was radically different, so the way he interacted with culture makes him seem different. And I think that's the more accurate, nuanced way to understand this. And you only get that if you do something that I've done, is to read the Bible cover to cover repeatedly.
Yeah.
And this picture emerges. And it's like, this is a tiny window into some little thing that's happening over here in the Old Testament where God says, put this guy to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath. That does not give you the sum total of all things that are true about God, that one event.
Well, so does morality, like, is morality consistent then? So the 10 Commandments, is that consistent?
The law is not consistent. Morality is consistent, but the law is not consistent.
Okay, so if morality is consistent, why is it able to change?
If, as you read through, like maybe the first laws start to get laid down in the book of Exodus, and you get to the end of Deuteronomy, and or even go further into that, there are laws that change. There are laws that are actually contradict themselves. If you are unclean, you must not approach any of the holy things. You must approach the holy things on the Passover and eat them. So you've got laws that are contradictory. And that happens in the book of Numbers. Somebody, they're having a conversation in the house and suddenly dad dies and falls against somebody. You have now touched a dead body. You are unclean. You cannot approach holy things. But it's Passover week and we are required. What do? So they go and Moses burns incense on the mercy seat and God appears in the cloud of smoke and says, here's what you do. And so the law, there are two laws that will potentially create a situation where there is no right way to obey God's laws. The laws themselves contradict themselves, so it's imperfect. And then as the territory is expanding and it becomes impractical to bring your animals on a long journey to the temple, God says you can exchange your animals for money. You can make the journey and you can buy another animal when you get there. So there's this amendment to the law. There's these caveats to the law, and there's these exceptions to the law, and then you get into the prophets.
And the much easier thing to realize is that, it's 2,000 to 3,000 years ago with the worst information transfer available. And you have a bunch of people that are, herding sheep or growing olives or whatever, masons and things. They're like trying to like come up with some ideas about how stuff works when they have like no scientific method, no understanding of any of that stuff going on. And so they change shit to make themselves not be the villain in different situations.
That could be. Or you could buy the biblical narrative altogether, which is also
you
plausible.
Could. I mean, I definitely always say like the worst thing you can do for a Christian is to have them read the Bible. Like,
yeah,
if you want to destroy people's faith, most people have them go read the Bible. Because like if you don't deeply want to believe that what you're like going into it, that what you're reading is like good and wholesome and that there's like infinite wisdom in there and stuff, when you get into it, your worldview is going to be shattered about what you think you believe.
Yeah, Michael Heiser, he talks about this epiphany he had where he decided he would stop protecting people from their Bibles. And churches, a lot of what churches do is protect people from their Bibles.
That's right.
And the church that I was most recently formally kicked out of, it was because I had too much Bible knowledge. And I just had a conversation with a guy who was talking about the churches that he had to leave. They said, you're studying the Bible too much. And so, yeah, you've probably done this where you've read the whole Bible, right?
Yeah, I have.
And you see,
and like Exodus and stuff like that, when it's like describing how to beat your servants and all this kind of stuff, I'm just like,
yeah,
this is fucked. Like this stuff is disgusting. And I realize it's one account in history, sure, but it's like, I mean, the Old Testament almost entirely, like other than historical accounts, is almost entirely unusable in today's society. But
yeah,
in the sense of like applying what they did then to now,
and
it's just almost entirely incongruent.
If you get all the way through the whole narrative, you get into the New Testament and the New Covenant, and you understand the thing that these stories are trying to point at, that this is not the map, or this is the map, it's not the territory.
Yeah, the map is not the
Like
terrain. Yeah.
Jesus says, he's arguing with the Pharisees, and they're like, should we divorce our wives? And Jesus is like, look, from the beginning, God intended one man, one woman.
Mm-hmm.
Moses permitted you to give a bill of divorce, but this was not God's intention, and you were not able to receive God's intention because of the hardness of your heart, so Moses permitted this. So this idea that culture is not in a position to be ready for what's really going on a deeper level. And so the laws are primitive, dealing with primitive people who are regularly like burning their children alive.
Yeah.
And some of these laws seem super extreme, but think about what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And that law is no longer appropriate for this situation. So Jesus, at the proper time, starts manifesting these truths about God that the world was not ready to understand. And then it can be confusing. Like, why is it that the Ten Commandments say, don't commit adultery? In the New Testament, Paul's saying, don't commit adultery, but the New Testament, or the Ten Commandments also says, don't violate the Sabbath. But Paul says, let no one judge you in terms of keeping the Sabbath. It doesn't matter anymore.
So, right. So we get to pick and choose.
Yeah. How is he doing this? And then you realize that there is a way to do that. And it's by understanding the spirit of it.
Yeah.
So like the Passover. Well, if you go back and you read what was the purpose of the Passover, it was so that the Jews would remember that God miraculously delivered them from slavery in Egypt, so that they would have this memory of God's power and kindness and stuff to them. So the Passover doesn't really mean a whole lot for me. My ancestors were never delivered from slavery in Egypt, unless I have some Jews in my history. So it's like, for me to celebrate the Passover, that would be kind of dumb. It doesn't align with the purpose of the Passover. So you get into the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law.
Yeah.
And people get confused about that. It's like, unless you understand what is the point of this law, then obeying the letter of it does nothing for you. So when Paul says, let each of you walk in love towards one another, therefore put away lying and speak the truth with one another. Love is basically, it's the fulfillment of all of the Old Testament prophecies. All of the law and the prophets is fulfilled in this: love your neighbor. And technically, there are laws in the Old Testament that have nothing to do with love your neighbor. And so how can you reconcile those two? And it's like, because it's nuanced, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And God's ideal is that we should walk in love towards one another. And if we do walk in love towards one another, then going and pulling your donkey out of a well on the Sabbath is the right thing to do.
Well, and yes, exactly. And it's, what is going on is that there are fundamental truths in the world that are applied in all situations, or can be applied in all situations. And we as a human culture are like evolving as we step through this stuff.
Yes.
And those texts are some of the most early accounts of people taking a stab at what they see those truths as. Mm-hmm. And as we've, discovered more and learned more and come up with newer and more effective ways to test and measure things, we've, we continue to refine those truths. Sexuality is like a huge, it's a very touchy subject in the Bible, we'll say. Right. Like no matter which way it is, but it's like, what it really comes down to is that the animal part of human beings have certain urges. Mm-hmm. And as far as we can tell, like a lot of those urges are kind of wired into us through our DNA. Like part of it is our choices, and part of it is just how we're wired. So luckily, most of us have a pretty non-destructive wiring. Like I love my wife. I am completely happy with putting my energy into her and all this. So, and I don't have any like deviancy that I need in the bedroom. It's like, I'm not like into anal, it's like, I don't need to like strap her into a swing and like put nipple clamps on her to be excited, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's pretty normal stuff, and I'm good with it. But like, there are people out there that is where they get excited and the other stuff doesn't excite them. And there's, other people that only get excited over the same sex. And it's like, and it goes worse than that, like I don't have any, like like pedophilia is disgusting, and like we need to protect children. But like, what an awful situation that would be to find yourself where the internal drive that you have is towards something like that that's so destructive towards society and to yourself and everyone around you, and that's like,
Yeah. Well, and we get back to that
it,
horrific mistake that St. Augustine did when he was creating all the foundations of what has become Christianity today. The idea that this is the way that I am and that's the way everybody else is.
yeah,
Without recognizing that you can be transformed. Like, I am not the same person in many respects that I used to be, and things
none
that
of us are.
used to be important to me no longer are. And the women that I used to be attracted to based on certain characteristics, it's no longer like that. So your sexual preference can change. And the fact
Yeah,
that the majority of people who are, homosexual, for example, have been abused by an uncle or something like that. It's just the statistical reality
yeah,
of this. That has had an effect on them. So they were one way, then they got sexually abused, and now they're another way.
yeah,
And you can go from the way that they are now back to a different way. So these events, or the way that you're thinking about things, or the way that you're conditioned, you can go from being a pro skier to having no ability to ski at all just because you let that thing diminish. You stopped
you
engaging
get a
in
head
that.
injury and you wake up and you just don't have it anymore. Like,
Yeah,
there's all
so
kinds of things.
people have these incredibly narrow, shallow views of all of these things. Like,
But the trouble of like saying like this is the only right way is like the harm that we've caused to people who find themselves outside of those tracks is terrible. And I mean, there's some ways of being, like people who are like violent offenders and rapists and stuff. Like, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but you are a danger to yourself and society. You are not allowed to participate in normal society.
yeah,
I mean, there is just no situation where we can tolerate that. But the non-violent things that aren't destructive to the individuals that we have come down hard on, it's terrible. And I found myself on that side. I mean, growing up in Christian, like I very much was against like gays allowing to be married. I was always okay with like the legal part because I'm like, I hate the government. I hate big government. And it's like, look, if you want to enter into a legal contract with a lamp, I don't care. Do whatever the hell you want. Like, it does not matter at all to me. But to say that, and I still believe this, but to say that a marriage is anything, a Christian marriage is anything other than what is defined in the Christian Bible, that's wrong. And I still believe that, it's like the
yeah,
Christian definition of marriage is what the Christian definition of marriage is now and will ever be, and it's only between man and woman. But the harshness that we've applied in society because people fall out of that is criminal.
yeah. Well, the question of how should we behave towards someone who is a pedophile versus, um, should a pedophile be given rights to explore his cravings?
Of
Those are
course
two
not,
completely different questions.
because it's totally damaging. That's the problem. It's like the rapist. You can't give a rapist like freedom to go explore, what excites them. Like, it's completely damaging to the society. So no, you can't tolerate it.
Yeah,
But
and
it would be terrible to be caught in a body that's wired that way.
so imagine a person is just a gigolo and they've got, tons of sexual partners, and they're also spreading diseases as they're doing that. A rational person should be able to look at that and say, you've got, gonorrhea and 3 types of hepatitis and AIDS, and you're going out and you're getting new sexual partners all the time. It's like the rapist.
Yeah.
But some people might argue, well, it's a natural urge, so we're trying to take this behavior, we're all of these different kinds of sexual behaviors, and we're trying to put them into different boxes, bad, good, and nobody, for the most part, is going to say a monogamous heterosexual relationship where you've got 2 kids and a good job and you're productive. Nobody's going to say that's deviant.
Yeah,
And that's
boring.
horrible. But you might say the gigolo who's spreading hepatitis everywhere, that is deviant, that is damaging to society.
Hmm.
But if somebody's in a particular group where virtue signaling and politicizing a thing, like let's say the gigolo or the there's this movement to defend the rights of pedophiles now, and if that becomes the new thing that we virtue signal about, and we try to defend the rights of, and then you can't talk about it anymore. You can't have the conversations about it anymore, and that has become one of the problems with the whole transgender thing. We can't objectively look at the data because it's so politicized, and
Yeah.
we have people like screaming for the rights of something that's not necessarily going to benefit them or the people around them, and we assume that that's the way that they are, and we forget that people can become like something, and then they can become not like that thing as their disposition changes, and traumatic events can cause that to happen, and counseling can actually change that. So the person who's like
And
total
psychedelics.
person who's a total porn addict and who's cheating on his wife all the time, nobody's going to call that good, and that can be changed. A person can go through counseling, a person can have a paradigm shift, a person can have all of this stuff just like cleansed from his soul and stop being that way, and it's literally no longer a desire. It's not the way that they're wired anymore.
Yeah.
The wiring can change. Well, we could get canceled for saying, for the homosexual, their wiring can change and they can stop being like that.
It can, but it's not up for us to try and force that change on them in that situation.
Yeah. What should we do about that? That's a different question.
Right. Well, and that yes, it absolutely is, but that is the problem, is that it instantly transition, like the two get muddled together. So whether or not it can change or whether or not a society should change it are two separate things.
And if it can change, how do we do that? And what is our responsibility? And these are all
right. And that's the
complicated,
problem,
different
is that
questions.
everyone's scared. It's like, if it can change, which it can, then everyone's like, oh, now you're going to try and change it because you think that this will help them, and now we're doing something that's bad. So
Yeah.
let's say it can't change here to protect ourselves from the other question, where if we had enough trust and respect and love, we could just talk about this and say, yeah, it is fluid, or it can be fluid. Maybe it's not for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone, but it could be. And then we could have a different conversation over, is there intervention that could or should be done, and would that help?
Yeah. And as someone who has had predisposition in the past towards something that was, well, like I was craving attention. If you've been around somebody who wants to be the center of attention, they are so annoying. It's an ironic twist of fate that the person who wants to be accepted is the person who nobody wants around.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing, that it's the exact same thread of phenomenon, that the things that are most repulsive to you are the personality traits that you hate about yourself.
It tends to be true.
Everyone.
So the way to change, though, for me, the way to change was to have a paradigm shift, for basically circumstances in my life to come together in such a way that the question was put in front of my face: why do you care about being accepted? And then for me to say, I don't know why.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why are we trying to do it? Well, yeah.
And then you suddenly put that on the shelf, and the things that I was doing to get accepted, it's like, why was I doing that? Why did I think? And similar things happened with money.
Mm-hmm.
Why was I trying to get all this money? I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Why am I trying to become influential? I don't know. That's an interesting question. You start shelving.
That's why I walked away from Christianity for a while. I was like, why do I believe this? And I was like, I really didn't know. I was like, well, I grew up with it. That's not a great reason. So I put it on the shelf and went on a different journey for a few years and found my way back to it in a different way, but different light. But
I define Christianity as, here's the way that Jesus thought. Here's the things that he believed about the Father. Here's the goals that he oriented towards. And I am going to try to understand that and bring it into my context and live out the wisdom of Jesus, the principles that he lived by in my own set of circumstances. And that's
beautiful.
Being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
People have really loose definitions of what it means to be a Christian. Sometimes they think it's just that I go to a Baptist church on Sundays.
Yeah.
And I signed their statement of faith, which has some Augustinian paradigms.
My definition of being a Christian at this point is that it's a accurate description of the way that the world was created and is interacted with but it's just not specific.
Yeah.
And it's that choice. I think all of it really comes down to that choice. I mean, that's, you strip everything else away, and it's either you choose to believe that there is an afterlife and that this is, at the minimum, a path to get there, the path or a path. You can, I don't care what you think on that. I think it's a path. I'm certain it's a path there.
Okay.
This might be the only one. It might not be. I don't care.
Well, my honest take on
And
it,
I'm going to follow it.
when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me.
Mm-hmm.
He's not saying Jesus is a magic word that you have to say in order to get to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Enoch, who walked with God and was translated. You've got Elijah, who was taken up to heaven. You've got Abraham, who is the father of our faith. You've got David, who's a man after God's own heart. You got Samuel.
Could the Egyptians have like 10,000 head ice or whatever?
You got all of these people who attained eternal life and who connected with the Father, who never heard the name Yehoshua, what Jesus probably would have been called.
Keep talking. I just want to look that up because that's something, if Christians haven't heard it, it's always a kick in the teeth.
What?
Egypt had a Jesus-like character that is the exact same story.
Yeah. So whether or not you've heard the name Jesus, or you've heard the doctrines of, usually it's a penal substitution, Jesus paid your penalty on the cross kind of thing, or whether or not you believe in the Trinity or any of that kind of stuff, it's completely irrelevant to walking the path that Jesus walked. You might not have even known the name Jesus, but the path that Jesus walked is the same path that Abraham walked. He connected to the Father. He trusted the Father. He was willing to put this life to death for the higher principle of doing the will of the Father, which is exactly what Jesus did. And so the people in the end times who obtain eternal life because they did not love their lives unto death. They lay down their lives that they might find it. This path of being conformed to the death of Christ, we don't even have to know the story of Jesus to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
This path of the virtue of doing what is right, even if it costs you your life. That's what Jesus did. You don't have to know about Jesus in order to do that.
That's right.
So Jesus is a map, but he's not the territory. And there are people who have found the territory without the particular map of Jesus.
Yes, that's a great way to say it. I thought it started with an H. I can pull it later, but there's another story. It is Jesus as we know it, like 10,000 years or something before 8,000 years in Egypt. Maybe that's too long ago. Several thousand years before Jesus, there was another Jesus that had an almost identical message.
Yeah.
And there's the whole data transfer problem. So if Jesus is the only way, what about the tribesmen in Africa or South America or wherever, right? That never have any contact outside of their tribe, that live a completely Jesus-like life. They believe in an afterlife. They have their own.
Yeah.
Is that person condemned to all of hell and eternity because they didn't have the data connection to the Bible?
Yeah, or the right vocabulary words.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's why I say it's a path. It's a path that's been presented to me. I'm willing to take it.
Yeah, and the reason that, like, what we're talking about now, for most people who are going to watch this aren't going to necessarily have a problem with it, but there will be people who some Christian friend pointed them to this YouTube channel, and their Christianity is on the level of, I belong to this church, I signed their statement of faith. And they're confusing the map with the territory. They're confusing. These are the sets of words that we must say in order to be part of this group. And they have no clue what it means when Jesus says, I am the way, because they haven't thought about it. They think that Jesus is like a street in Santa Monica or something, and that you have to drive down it to get to heaven. It's not like that. He's saying something very profound, and he's saying that you live a particular philosophy of life in order to attain eternal life. And the words that you use to point at that thing are irrelevant, which is why there's so many different places in the Bible that point at that thing. Jesus is one of them. And he's, like maybe the clearest picture of that. But Enoch is one of them, and Abraham is one of them, and David is one of them. And they're all pointing at the same thing, using different narratives, using different words, But the people who are going to get freaked out about this way of thinking about it are the people who they go to the local Pentecostal church and they use the name of Jesus for everything. And they think that it's the word Jesus is like a special word. Yeah. And if you attach
like a magic wand,
every
time you wave it and
in Jesus' name to something, then that's righteous. Or for some of the Pentecostals, anything that's supernatural is true or spiritual. And for the Baptists, anything that's not supernatural is right and true. And it's like, this is more nuanced. It's I talked about a dog gives birth to a dog, which becomes fully dog in a very short amount of time. And that's a lot of the people's Christianity is like that. They learn how to say the sets of words, and they're a mature dog.
Yeah.
They can fetch a stick and they can bark at a stranger, and that's about it. But what do you call it? A divine being, someone who's going to be a partaker of the divine nature. It takes years and years and years. It takes being rejected by this church and trying another one, and finding that this church has its failings, and then finding another one, and then maybe we're getting closer. Hopefully, I hope that we're on the right path, which is a path of trying to sort all of this stuff out, and be somebody who is fit for eternity. Hopefully we're on the right path.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, the first level of any kind of self-realization is that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right? You hear that?
Yeah.
And that's like level one. And then like the next level is like, well, it's not quite like that either. It's more like listening to a song. Like there is no desire to get to the end of the song. You're just enjoying it while it's happening. Like there is no end of song. I completed the song, yeah. like there is no destination at all in there. And that's like another level. And there's probably hundreds of levels, and who knows, I don't even know where I fall on that, but it's like that realization. And eventually you fully will disconnect yourself from saying that I know. And it's like, you're just completely open to like, hey, everything I think is true might not be true. It's just that I'm sharpening my toolkit to find truths and measure and weigh things. And while I'm listening to this song that is my life, I'm kind of stacking things up, which I repeatedly find aren't violated by other things. Or if there is contradictory material, it holds up pretty well. It's like you don't fight bad ideas with silencing. You fight bad ideas with better ideas. Yeah. So if you have an idea that's like more resilient against other ideas that keep hitting it, that's probably a little bit better truth.
There's some insight in this adversarial AI model where when you argue with somebody who's from a completely different, discuss,
sure,
you have a meaningful discussion with somebody who sees things in a completely different way. Well, you're pushing up against an uncomfortable part of reality that you weren't aware of before, and you're having to grow in order to be able to now enter into a scenario where we're identifying dogs that look kind of like blueberry muffins, and because that's an AI problem, it does great under certain circumstances, and then you throw it a wild card and now it has no clue. Same thing is true as we're on this spiritual journey. When we're just part of the same church our whole life and everything is super simple, then we can fetch a stick and we can bark at the stranger and but then you go and walk into a Greek Orthodox church and see what's going on there, and you have zero clue. You have no idea. And then, unfortunately, the reality of eternity is that there's lots of different terrain out there, lots of different things out there. And if we're going to be fit for eternal life, we have to be able to take our spirituality into these situations and be anti-fragile there and anti-fragile over here. And to do that, we have to keep moving, pressing, and hopefully we're going into a church for a while, finding that it's got some answers, but not all of it, and then moving out, and then going into something else, finding it's got some answers, then moving out. Maybe going over here, and we're wondering what's going on in the occult, and we interact with that for a little while, and we discover what's going on there, and we move out, and we keep refining and encountering, and it's a dangerous path. It's a horrible way. But I would say, and maybe my view will change at some point, but I think what we are trying to get to is the person who is being murdered on the cross, the most horrific way possible, who can only think about the people who are doing that, taking pity on them and wanting them to have eternal life, wanting them to get off of this narrow, destructive path and find the Father. So it's this compassion that is so powerful that it's still there even when your enemy is killing you. You can only feel compassion. And you pray, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that is the pinnacle. That is the...
Oh, it is. I mean, when you think about, Jesus dying on the cross, that is the ripple that shot all through existence.
Yeah, this is what a first person who is fit for the kingdom of heaven looks like.
Yeah.
And unless you can achieve that, you're not fit for eternal life.
Yeah.
And that's the harsh reality of it. And it's your responsibility to get there. And it's God's responsibility to give you everything you need.
Kids are kind of a cheat, to like get you a step closer to the awareness of what it looks like, like the feelings that you have towards your children are very selfless, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Anybody who heard what I just said, well, not anybody, a lot of people who heard what I just said will start posting all sorts of stuff about salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, and not by works.
Again, it's like keep repeating your phrases. It's like that. Carol DeWick has a wonderful book on what you're talking about called Mindset.
Yeah.
And if I can boil the whole entire book down to one thing, it's identify your personality solely as a learner. It's that, the act of applying all of these categories and labels to our lives. I'm a Christian. I believe in this. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I have, just whatever it is. All that does is it just shuts down thought.
Yeah.
So if you hear something like you just heard and you're like, oh, hold on, let me flip to the page and post it. Like, you're not thinking. You're not thinking.
Something really interesting about Ephesians 2:8-9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Okay. By grace through faith. Everybody pulls that passage. They've never read Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1, he has lavished upon us in his grace in wisdom and prudence. Jesus is revealing a bunch of truth that we need to understand so that we will stop thinking this way and start thinking this way. Similar in Titus chapter 2, where it says, the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, teaching that we should deny ungodliness and the lusts of the flesh. So God in his grace gives us Jesus, who reveals this wisdom. So the grace that we have been saved by in Ephesians 2, you don't know what it is unless you've actually read Ephesians 1. It's the wisdom that has been lavished upon us in his grace. So you could say, by the wisdom that Jesus has given us, because of his kindness, we are saved if faith is reasoning to a solid conclusion about what's going on. If we engage with that wisdom, internalize it and become that. You can't just pull Ephesians 2 out of its context and ignore what it's referring to when it says by grace or by faith. You got to go back to chapter 1. What is that grace? It's talking about this wisdom that God has lavished upon us by explaining these spiritual realities, explaining this path, this way of thinking, this way of feeling, this way of behaving. It's all this truth that you have to believe. Jesus talks about laboring to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like I had a closing. Does it feel like we're winding down?
I think it's a pretty good closing right there. It is. It's a labor of belief. Yeah. It's about learning. I think it's a good closing. I think it's a good way to wrap everything up.
Yeah. Well, if there's anybody listening live and you have any questions,
you poor people.
Well, you got a few seconds here before we shut it down. So, got some of my loyal fans are in the live chat, and people are just sort of pulling up verses as we're talking.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, Melissa Doherty is interesting. I think.
Yeah, I'll check her out.
Yeah, she kind of went Calvinist, Reformed cessationist. So
I think, I'm missed. So there's like the Doherty factor or whatever in computing. That's like anything that happens under 400 milliseconds is imperceivable to humans. So there was like a software, it's something like that. There's like a software engineer, and I was confusing. So I don't know
Okay.
anything about Melissa. So we're able to check that out.
Yeah, I think she was wrapped up in sort of the hyper Pentecostal stuff and saw its connection to the New Age and the sort of the thirst for supernatural power that's there, where power is an end in itself. And she sort of flipped over and is now following like Justin Peters and Paul Washer and some of these cessationist sort of reformed thinkers. And hopefully she'll bounce back to maybe the truth at some point and realize that there's nothing wrong with the supernatural. It's like a tractor or a hammer. It's just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we're orienting towards what Jesus was orienting towards, which was to give people eternal life, if we're targeting that, then the supernatural just becomes a tool instead of an end.
Yeah.
And yeah, so maybe
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where she needs to bounce back to. Anyway, well, I guess that's it. So
it's been fun. I hope it was interesting. I don't know.
I think this is one of the most interesting.
Oh, that's cool.
I've had.
Yeah, I hope so. It's my first ever podcast, so that's
really.
Yeah, so I'm happy to break my podcast cherry with you.
Yeah,
you can edit that part out if you want. I don't
know.
No,
we can't. It was live, so yeah. This is I like when my mom watches this one, she's gonna be like, "Ooh!" When some of the.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, look, I grew up, I love my parents, and they're extremely Catholic in all the best ways.
Yeah.
In all the absolute best ways. I have a lot of respect for the Catholic Church. I have a lot of things that I would critique. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely am aware that a lot of the things I say are like very disrespectful towards the traditions and all these types of things. But it's a bit meant to be, and it's the tool that I've needed in order for me to go beyond just my basic understanding.
I'm leaning towards viewing like obscenity. It's people who confuse the map with the territory. Like it is a word, and when a person uses that word, they're using it to mean a particular thing. Mm-hmm. That, like a lot of times when people throw the F word around, they just mean a thing that they don't care about. And if I said, yeah, it's something that doesn't mean anything to me, I'm saying the same thing as the person who's using the F word.
Yeah.
So it's like you got to get past this idea that the word itself is something.
Yeah, I mean, it incites all of. I do curse. It's one of my favorite vices that I have, and it incites a lot of emotion when used correctly.
Yeah,
and I try to be relatively. I mean, when I'm with my friends, I'm not, but when I'm, having a more professional conversation, I do curse in professional conversations, and I do it with intention to ignite some kind of emotion.
Right. And like if I ever use curse words, around people who know me, it's like the room suddenly grows cold.
Right.
And everybody stops what they're doing. People who curse continuously, it loses all of its value. So a choice curse word here and there used appropriately, I think, is the right way to do it. And Jesus used language that would have been considered foul and offensive regularly, sometimes with the intention of offending. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a mature way to view obscenity, just like there's a nuanced and complex and sophisticated way to view like everything.
Yep.
With an understanding based on the spirit rather than the simplicity, the shallowness of just viewing the letter of the law. So that's a weird caveat. Oh, we should stop. All right. Well, maybe we'll have you come back again because this is really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe a specific topic to expound on.
Yeah, I mean that sounds fun. I really am excited about cryptocurrency stuff. I think that I don't think there's this enormous movement happening. I think in geopolitics, there's a huge movement happening. I think there's a lot to dissect there as well.
Yeah, there's almost like a very obvious two paths right now. The decentralized path that would be what Jesus was promoting, which is personal responsibility.
Amen.
And then there's the centralized path, which is let's let Big Brother make all our decisions for us.
Yeah,
and I feel
they'll own everything and you'll be happy.
Yeah, I feel like the Antichrist and the Christ spirit are the decentralized and the centralized, and there's like a one-to-one. We need to expand our vocabulary to be able to connect what's going on today to what the Bible is talking about. Because if it were possible, it would deceive even the very elect, right? It's probably because the vocabulary is different, even though we're talking about the same things. So
I
maybe
mean, that is incredible insight. I haven't thought about that, but yeah, I completely agree.
Yep. So maybe that'll be our next topic, and I think we should do this again.
Cool.
So,
Yeah, I'd love to.
all right. Well, peace, love, and kittens, everybody. And until next time.